Welcome back to Storytime Classics. This is part 2 of The Red Widow, or The Death Dealers of London by William Le Queux. Previously, we uncovered the first hints of a deadly plot threatening the heart of London. Now, the mystery deepens and the identity of the Red Widow inches closer to being revealed. Let's dive back into the suspenseful world of international intrigue and deadly secrets. Chapter 16. Baiting the Trap. Next day, Boyne remained in the house until Marigold had left to go to the city, for she was anxious to report the result of her vigil to her lover, and then, instead of going out upon his daily collection of insurance premiums, he went upon street. He arrived at the fine red brick house about 11, opening the door with his latchkey. He found his wife in her bedroom, and closing the door, he exclaimed in an unusually excited voice, "Lilla, there's trouble brewing. Very serious trouble." "In what direction?" gasped the handsome woman, starting from the long mirror before which she was arranging her blouse. "That girl Marigold, the old woman Felmore's niece, is suspicious, and she has established herself in my house in order to watch me." "Why is she suspicious?" "I don't know. That's the mystery of it. How much she knows I can't tell." "One thing is plain," said the woman. "If we're to save ourselves, her lips must be closed. Surely that will be easy. Just a nice box of chocolates, tied with ribbon, or something like that, eh? We did it before with little Louise at Cheltenham." "Yes, but I don't like doing it. She's really an awfully nice girl, and I haven't the heart to give her a dose." "She's watching you, you say? Therefore she's a danger to us all. Didn't I warn you about her weeks ago? If you don't want to court trouble, just give her a box of those beautiful, expensive sweets, and then goodbye to all our worries." Boyne made no answer. His wife saw his hesitation and went on. "It was a rotten trick at Cheltenham, I admit, but it had to be done, just as it must be done in this case. We surely can't afford to take any risks, my dear Bernie. What a good job that you found out that she suspects," she remarked. "So she must fade out, and very quickly, too. It's up to you to do the necessary." "But the man, this clerk in Mincing Lane, Gerald Durrant, he's a most pertinacious person, it seems. We have, I think, more to fear from him than from the girl," Boyne said. "Didn't I express doubt a week or so ago? But you assured me that it was all right," retorted the handsome woman. "Well, what are you going to do?" "Do? Why, there's only one way. Put an end to their inquisitiveness," he replied. "Do be careful." "Oh, I will be. Never fear. But I shall want your assistance, Lilla, and perhaps Aina's too. Neither the man nor the girl is acquainted with either of you, which is one point in our favor." "Have you thought out any plan?" she asked anxiously. "I've not completed it yet," he answered. "There must be no failure, remember," said his wife, betraying considerable anxiety. "What could have aroused the suspicions of this accursed girl, I wonder?" I can't tell. I'm always most careful. But I have confirmed my suspicion that while the girl is in the house, the fellow watches outside. He followed me last night, and I led him a pretty good chase up to Hampstead, where I called to see Ted Lyons. Ted might be useful," she exclaimed quickly. "No, we must keep this affair to ourselves. It's far too dangerous." "Well, Aina and I will help you. But something ought surely to be done as soon as possible." "I quite agree, Lilla. But the question is, how shall we act for the best? It's easy to deal with the girl, especially as she's living in your house for a week. But how shall we tackle the man?" she asked. "That's the difficulty. I don't want anything to happen while she's in my house," was his reply. "I allowed her to stay because I wanted to satisfy myself that she was really spying. Now I've confirmed my suspicions, and we must act." "Well, at any rate, it's a good thing that we know the truth," the woman answered. "You must have blundered in some way or other, so it is up to you to wriggle out of a very awkward situation." "It is awkward, I admit," he said, gazing blankly out of the window. "If they got to know the true secret of that upstairs room, it would mean that we should at once be in Queer Street, in more senses than one, shouldn't we?" "They must not know," said the woman in a hard, fierce tone. "You will know how to deal with them, Bernard. People who have tried to pry into our private affairs before have, all of them, bitterly regretted it. Haven't they?" Boyne grunted, but made no reply. "Will you tell Aina?" she asked. "Not yet. It may only frighten her unduly. When I want her help, I'll see her, Perhaps tomorrow, was his reply. I suppose we ought to have news from Lancaster Gate very soon, she said. Mrs. Morrison went to tea with Ana yesterday. Today she has gone back to Brighton, but is due here again tomorrow. Yes, we ought to hear of some development soon, he said with a grim smile. That affair is going all right. It's this girl and her man who are so confoundedly dangerous to our plans. You had similar trouble with Aiken a year ago, and you found an easy way out of it, Bernard. No doubt you'll soon think of some means by which an end can be put to their infernal inquisitiveness. I have a call to make, he said, rising from his chair suddenly. I'll be back again this afternoon. I'm going into the city. And he went out. At lunchtime, Marigold met her lover, and it was arranged that, as he would be at the office late that evening, he should not resume his watch until the following evening. Neither of them, of course, suspecting that Boyne knew they were keeping him under observation or that he was busy laying a most devilish plan for their undoing. Gerald Durrant had grown fonder of Marigold than ever, and the pair were now inseparable. He disliked the idea of the girl living in that house of mystery, but she told him that she was in no way afraid, and that she was determined to solve the curious motive of Boyne's double life. When, at 6 o'clock, she returned, she sat down to tea with her aunt, and later, while she was laying Mr. Boyne's table, he came in, greeting her cheerily, as was his wont. His attitude towards her was distinctly friendly, for he gave no outward sign of suspicion. The evening passed uneventfully, for Boyne went out about 8 o'clock, and he did not return until long after the old woman and her niece were in bed. Marigold listened, but only heard him go up to his bedroom and close the door. After that there was no other sound. Boyne spent part of the following day with Lilla at Pont Street, where he held a long and secret consultation with her, after which he took a taxi to Upper Brook Street and sat with Ana for half an hour, explaining what he had discovered concerning the unwelcome attention which young Durrant and the girl was paying to him. The Red Widow at once became greatly perturbed. "But how much can they know?" she gasped, leaning forward in her chair, pale and agitated. "Very little. They know nothing of your upstairs friend." "No, but they may suspect." "Then their suspicion must be at once removed." "My dear Bernie," said the woman, in a decisive voice, "we are, I see, confronted with a very grave peril." "I agree. Lionel will be wondering why I've not been up to see him since Sunday. I shall go up this afternoon, before the girl comes back from the bank. I've got a lot of stuff to take up to him. He's got no kettle, poor chap." What a life he must lead," said the woman. "It is his own fault. He was too curious, and he got the worst of it, as they all do, but he was quite harmless. This fellow Durrant is our enemy, and he must be treated as such." "I found out a lot about his movements," said Boyne. "You quickly find out about people, Bernie. You're really wonderful." "Not very wonderful, Ana," he laughed. "I simply went a few days ago to Chalmers, the private inquiry agent in Regent Street, who has done work for me often. I told him I had lent young Durrant money and wanted to know something of his habits and of his friends. This morning I had a long confidential report about him. He lives out at Ealing. A pity you allowed the girl to stay with her aunt." "Why ever did you do so?" "Well, if she wished to walk into a trap, then it surely wasn't my business to keep her out of it. Was it?" he asked with a sinister smile. "I knew the reason why she had so suddenly been deprived of her room at Wimbledon Park, and allowed her to think that I was a fool. She'll no doubt know different ere long," laughed the Red Widow. Then, opening the door, Boyne satisfied himself that there was no servant in the passage, and returning to her, he began to speak rapidly in a low, tense voice. "What?" she asked breathlessly when he had finished. "Tonight." "Yes, tonight. Why not?" he asked. "Wear one of your smartest black dresses. Come round and see Lilla. Then you and she can arrange things." "But Bernard, it's a most desperate game." "Not more so than any other," he laughed. "A dangerous situation always calls for drastic measures. But will the trap be sufficiently well baited? I'll see to that. Never fear. Just act as I tell you, and tomorrow we shan't have much to fear from at least one of this inquisitive pair." For a few minutes she seemed lost in thought. I see you are hesitating, Ana," he laughed again. "I am. It's a terrible plot. Bah, fancy you saying so, you, who have assisted to bring off so many little affairs that have brought us big money. Surely you're not growing squeamish now, at a moment when we are all in distinct peril. No, she answered with an effort, for it was evident that the plan which he had placed before her had held her horrified. No, I'm not. Not at all squeamish, but, well, I'm wondering if we couldn't find some other way out of it. None. We're in danger, and we must take precautions to defend ourselves, at once, tonight. Very well, she answered somewhat reluctantly. I'll go round to Lilla about 6. When we meet, we shall do so as strangers, of course, he said, with a sinister smile. Look your best, won't you? Very well, she laughed, and 5 minutes later he sat down at the telephone in the room and spoke to his wife. All right, Lilla, he said, Anna will be with you about 6. I've told her exactly what we've arranged. I'm now going back to Hammersmith, and after hanging up the receiver, he took leave of the Red Widow and went direct to Bridge Place. Mrs. Felmore was surprised that her master should return so early, for he was at home before 5. Marigold had not come in from the office. Therefore he sent the deaf old woman out to the post, and, putting on his long white gown, took up to the attic the new tin kettle and some other things. But he did not obtain them from that cupboard in his room. He had purchased duplicates on his way home. He was not upstairs for more than 5 minutes, just sufficient to reassure the weird recluse and hand to him the necessities required. Then he came down again and calmly read the evening paper till his meal was ready. Marigold did not return before 7, but she left her lover to resume his vigil outside. At 8 o'clock, Bernard Boyne went out as usual, and Marigold spent another quiet evening with her aunt, confident that Gerald was keeping a very vigilant eye upon the man of mystery. Next day at the lunch hour, she went eagerly to the little restaurant, but he did not put in an appearance. She wondered why. On returning to the bank, she at once rang up his office, but was informed that he had not been there that day. He had sent his principal a telegram stating that he had been suddenly taken ill and apologized for his absence. The doctor had said that he could not return for several days. Making excuse to Mr. Kenyon, the assistant manager, she left the bank at 4 and at once went over to Ealing, only to find that his sister had received a telegram late on the previous night, which had been handed in at Charing Cross Post Office and read, "Don't worry, I am all right. Returning in 2 or 3 days." Writing to Gerald, further mystified, she at once went back to Hammersmith, where she found a telegram which had arrived for her at 11 o'clock that morning. It had been dispatched from Knightsbridge and read, "Am all right, dear. Do not worry. Have discovered something, but am not returning for a day or 2. Jerry." "Is it for Mr. Boyne?" asked her aunt as she watched the girl's face. "No." "Why?" she asked. "Because Mr. Boyne hasn't been home all night," was her aunt's reply. "I can't think what's happened to him. When I went up this morning to wake him, because I thought he had overslept himself, I found that his bed had not been slept in." Chapter 17. News from Lancaster Gate. Marigold was naturally much puzzled. What had her lover discovered? What did he know? By the varying forms of the telegrams, she saw that he had excused himself from the office upon a plea of illness, while really he was working in secret to elucidate the mystery of the hooded man of Hammersmith. The fact that Boyne had been absent that night and had not yet returned did not arouse her curiosity, for she concluded that Jerry had been following him ever since the previous evening. She relied upon her lover's cleverness and ingenuity. The changing of his clothes showed her that he was resourceful. She admired him for it, so she took her tea with her aunt and afterwards laid Mr. Boyne's table in eager readiness for his return. He came in and greeted her as cheerily as usual. "Tell Mrs. Felmore that I expect she's been wondering where I've been all this time. But I went out to Loughton in Essex to see a friend last night, and I stayed there. Tell her so, Miss Marigold, will you? And now for my supper. I'm horribly hungry." He ate his meal, yet not by any means in the manner of a hungry man. He only toyed with it. For a matter of fact, he had left Pont Street half an hour before, having taken leave of the Red Widow and his wife, whose faces had borne grim smiles of complete satisfaction. That night, as Marigold lay awake, unable to sleep, she became obsessed by the one idea that she ought to leave the house of mystery and return to Wimbledon Park. Gerald, by his mysterious message to her, had evidently got upon the track of something, Therefore, it was useless for her to remain any longer in that strange atmosphere of doubt and fear. Boyne had retired, and though she remained on the alert until the first streak of dawn shone through the blinds, she heard no movement to arouse her suspicion. Next day, when she came down into the kitchen, she told her aunt that she was returning home. So, taking her blouse case, she left before Mr. Boyne came downstairs. "Marigold has gone to the bank, sir," said Mrs. Fellmore when she placed Boyne's coffee and kippers upon the table. "She left word that she thanks you very much for allowing her to stay here, but she couldn't encroach on your kind hospitality any longer." "Oh," exclaimed Boyne in surprise. "She's gone?" "Yes, sir. She went out a quarter of an hour ago. She waited to see if you came down, but she had to go." Boyne grunted and remarked something beneath his breath, words that the deaf woman, even with her expert lip-reading eyes, could not understand. Marigold had slipped safely out of the way. The fact filled him with intense chagrin. What did it portend? At least Durrant's activity is at an end, he growled deeply to himself. Now we have to deal with this girl. For the present, nobody can know of the whereabouts of Gerald Durrant. When they do, I hope the peril will be over. And he swallowed his coffee with the gusto and satisfaction of a man who had made a most complete coup, and from whose mind some great weight had been lifted. An hour later, he entered the Hammersmith post office and telephoned to the Red Widow. "Any news, Ana?" he asked as he sat in one of the boxes. "Yes. Augusta spoke to me half an hour ago. I'm going round to Lancaster Gate at 11. She's taken ill. A pity, isn't it? Sorry to hear that," he replied in a grim voice. "I'll see you at Pont Street at 7. "Yes, I'll run round," Ana answered. "I've just been through to Lilla. I wonder what could be the matter with poor Augusta. A chill, perhaps. Poor lady. But I hope it isn't serious. I hope not. Goodbye for the present." And then the honest, hard-working collector of insurance premiums of the poor of Hammersmith went forth upon his daily round, trudging from street to street, knocking or ringing at the doors of the insured. He made a call in Dawling Road, just beyond the railway arch, and then, proceeding up the thoroughfare, consulted his pocket account book. Close to Chiswick High Road, he made a further call, where he signed the book for the weekly premium. Presently he halted at a small and very poor-looking house in the Devonport Road, a turning off the Goldhawk Road, where he rang at the door. At the windows were curtains blackened by the London smoke, for the whole neighborhood was one of genteel poverty, but of despair. An ugly but cleanly dressed old woman answered, and, seeing him, knit her brows. "Ah, come in, Mr. Boyne," she said, and the collector of premiums entered. 5 minutes later he came out, the old woman following him. He was evidently not himself, for usually his was a kindly nature towards the poor, but that day his manner was rough and uncouth. Something had upset him. "Well, I'm sorry, Mrs. Pentreth," he said in a loud voice, "but, you see, it isn't in my hands. I'm only a humble servant of the company, an ill-paid servant who gets just a living wage upon the premiums he collects. You've had time to pay, you know, and if you can't pay up this week, well, the policy must lapse. You've been given notice of it for 6 weeks. The company has been very lenient with you. Other companies wouldn't have been so lenient. But my poor Bertha, she's come home from service and is in bed with consumption. I have to look after her and try to give her the nourishment Dr. James orders. It isn't my fault that I haven't paid you. It really isn't. I can't help that," replied Boyne roughly. "Your insurance policy must lapse. That's all. And after 15 years that I've paid regularly each week," exclaimed the poor woman in dismay. "Well, it isn't my fault, I tell you. I'm not the company," was his harsh reply. "And my poor Bertha's so ill. It's cruel. It's inhuman, I say," she shouted in a shrill voice. Boyne only smiled grimly. He was not the kindly man of other days. "It probably is so," he replied, turning away from the door. "But it's our insurance business. And business is business, after all." "Yes," retorted the poor woman. "You people are robbing the poor. That's what it is. And after 15 years. Why, I've paid your company more in that time than what they would have paid to bury my Bertha." At a small house in the Loftus Road, he knocked 3 times, and a dwarfed, red-eyed girl at last opened the door. "Poor mother's dead, Mr. Boyne. Didn't you see the blinds?" she asked. Dead, he exclaimed, looking at the little window of the sitting room. Get your book. I'll go and get it, was the girl's reply. Mother died late last night. The doctor says it's heart disease. All right, give me the book, he said brutally. I suppose we'll have to pay. You paid up last week, didn't you? Yes, sir. I paid you, and you'll find it down, the girl said, and disappearing, she presently returned with the insurance book. The house-to-house visits of the insurance collector of those fat, dividend-paying companies who insure the lives of the lower classes are truly fraught with many strange dramas and stirring tales of poverty and misfortune. While Bernard Boyne was on his weary round, Aina Pollen alighted from a taxi at the private hotel in Lancaster Gate, a big, old-fashioned house which for years had been known to country visitors to London as a quiet and excellent place in which to stay. The young man-servant who opened the door told her that Mrs. Morrison was upstairs. The proprietor's wife met her in the hall and, in response to the Red Widow's inquiry, said, Mrs. Morrison hasn't been very well for a couple of days. She was taken last night, so I called my doctor, Dr. Tressiter, and he came to see her. He seems puzzled. He can't make out at present what's the matter with her. He's calling again tonight. She came over very ill when she returned from Brighton. I'll go upstairs, said Mrs. Pollen. It is most unfortunate, isn't it? She's only here in town for a short time, and now she's taken ill like this. I do hope it's nothing serious. Oh no. I asked Dr. Tressiter, and he thinks it is simply a little stomach trouble. Tomorrow she'll be better, was the woman's reply. So Aina ascended the stairs, and after tapping at the door, entered the neat little bedroom on the second floor. Well, dear, she exclaimed cheerily as she entered. I couldn't let the day pass without coming to see you. Whatever is the matter? I really don't know, Aina, replied Mrs. Morrison of Carsfairn. I felt so ill in the train coming up to Victoria that I had great difficulty in getting back here. But the doctor says you'll be all right tomorrow, said Aina. I feel awfully ill, replied the other feebly. I seem so feverish, hot at one moment and cold at another. No, said Mrs. Pollen cheerily. You'll be all right. Never fear. When one feels feverish, one's temperature is generally below normal. I do hope these people are looking after you all right. Oh yes, they do. I have no complaint to make on that score. You recommended me here, and I must say that I'm most comfortable. But what worries me is my visit up north. Don't bother about that, laughed the other. Get well first. Write and tell them you can't come. I wish you would do it for me. Pen and paper are over there, said the sick woman, whose eyes glistened strangely. No, you must do it, replied Aina quickly. She had a reason. If I were to write to them, they might think it strange. You're not too ill to write. I'll get you the pad. And, carrying it to her on the bed, she induced Mrs. Morrison to write 2 letters to her friends, letters which she duly posted when she got outside. The doctor doesn't seem to know what is the matter with me, the invalid said in a weak voice after she had laid down her fountain pen. My head is so terribly bad, and my throat too. What time is he coming again? Tonight, I think. I hope so. My dear, it's only a chill, Aina said with comforting cheerfulness. You'll be all right in a day or two. You've been in a draft, perhaps. But my head, it seems as though it must burst. At times I can't think. All my senses seem blurred. Did you tell the doctor that? Yes, and it seemed to puzzle him more than ever. I hope I'm not going to have a bad illness. Of course not, laughed Aina. You'll be better in a day or so. Remain quiet, and I'll run in tomorrow morning to see how you are. If you're worse, tell them to ring me up. I'm just going round to the Davidsons. They will be most distressed to hear of your sudden illness. The widow of Carsfairn turned over on her pillow and moaned slightly. Her face was flushed, and it was evident to Aina that the last words she had uttered the sick woman had not understood. So she took her leave, and, on descending the stairs to the wide hall, again encountered the proprietor's wife. My friend Mrs. Morrison seems very unwell, said Aina. I can't make it out at all. I do hope the doctor will discover what is the matter with her. Dr. Tressiter is my own doctor, replied the woman. He'll be here again before dinner time, and I hope he won't find anything really very wrong. Well, whatever he says, would you mind letting me know over the phone? Asked Aina, taking out her visiting card, upon which was printed her telephone number. Certainly I will, was the reply. And if there is anything serious, I'll come around at once, she said. So they parted, and Aina hailed a taxi outside and returned to Upper Brook Street, well satisfied with her morning's work. Chapter 18. The Coup and Its Consequence. Next day passed, but though Aina remained at home in a high state of anxiety, she received no message from Lancaster Gate. At 8 o'clock she rang up and spoke to the proprietress of the hotel. Mrs. Morrison is certainly not quite so well as she was yesterday, but though Dr. Tressiter has been twice today, he has not yet been able to diagnose the complaint. Is she in pain? Asked Mrs. Pollen sympathetically. No, she does not complain, but no doubt we shall know more tomorrow. Very well. Please tell her I inquired, and tomorrow, about 11, I'll call and see her again. And, having rung off, she spoke to Lilla, telling her of the conversation. You'll go tomorrow and see her, my dear, urged Boyne's wife. Bernard is here. I'll tell him. What about the girl? Asked Dana. Oh, for the present she's all right. She's gone back to Wimbledon. The telegrams have satisfied her. Right. Then I'll see you tomorrow after I've been to Lancaster Gate, said the Red Widow, and then they broke off the conversation. Well, the doctor doesn't know yet what's the matter, Lilla afterwards said to Boyne, who was sitting in the handsome drawing room. Oh, he will tomorrow. Never fear, was the man's grim reply. He must be a duffer if he doesn't recognize the symptoms. I expected him to know yesterday. You thought we should have had news on Wednesday, and it's now Friday. Yes, but delay is rather a good sign, he said. Did you tell Aina about the nursing home? Yes, I did so yesterday. I've heard that Miss Propert's out at Golders Green is quite a good place. Nobody connected with it has any knowledge of us. I told her that, and she agreed. She is rather afraid that some of Mrs. Morrison's friends may come up for Brighton, and she is in no way anxious to meet them. No, she mustn't do so, declared Boyne. She must take good care that no friends are at Lancaster Gate when she calls. Good. I'll tell her that over the phone presently. And also tell her not to take a too eager interest in her. I mean, no interest further than that of a comparatively freshly made friend, he said, and afterwards they went out to a theater together. Next morning, just before 11, as Aina Pollen was contemplating speaking with Mrs. Morrison's hotel, the proprietor's wife rang up. Mrs. Pollen, she said, I'm very sorry to give you bad news about your friend. Dr. Tressiter has just been here and says that she is suffering from diphtheria. Oh, I'm so sorry, cried the Red Widow. How very unfortunate. Are any other friends there? No, but I believe somebody is coming up from Brighton this afternoon. Very well, said Aina. I'll take a taxi and come round now. This she did. Pleading that she might become infected, she did not ascend to Mrs. Morrison's room, but sat in the little office of the proprietor's wife. Of course she can't remain here, said the woman. It isn't fair to my other visitors. Of course not, Aina agreed. She must go at once to a nursing home. A friend of mine had diphtheria about a year ago and went to a place somewhere at Golders Green. I think Prosser or Potter was the name of the person who runs it. We might perhaps find it in the telephone directory. I think that was the name, but I'm not quite sure. Poor Augusta. I'm so sorry, but I really think it would be unwise of me to go in and see her, don't you? I quite agree, replied the proprietor's wife, and, taking down the telephone directory, she began to search for the name, but could not find it. At last, after some minutes, she exclaimed, Ah, here it is. Miss Propert's nursing home. Yes, Golders Green. Here is the number. I'll telephone and ask if they have a room vacant. 5 minutes later, it was fixed. Miss Propert had promised to send an ambulance at once, and soon afterwards the Red Widow was round upon street reporting to Lilla all that had taken place, while early that same afternoon the patient had already been transferred to the nursing home, where she had been promised by the unsuspecting matron every attention. As the days passed, Marigold Ramsay traveled each morning from Wimbledon Park to the city, and sat each luncheon hour in the same little restaurant, but alone. She was sorely puzzled why Gerald did not write to her. Without doubt he had gone somewhere to follow up a clue concerning the mystery man of Hammersmith, but she felt hurt that he had not written to tell her of his whereabouts. Time after time she took out his telegram, which she carried in her big bag purse, and reread it. Am all right, dear. Do not worry. Have discovered something, but am not returning for a day or two to Jerry. The day or two had elapsed. He told her not to worry. Therefore, she tried to obey him. Still, it was strange that he did not send her a line. Twice she called his office in Mincing Lane, but she was told by a female clerk that Mr. Durrant had not returned. Nothing more had been heard of him, except that he was away at home ill. Marigold smiled within herself at the excuse her lover had given for his absence, and wondered hour by hour what he had discovered concerning Mr. Boyne. She went over to Hammersmith and had tea with her aunt. From her, she learned that her employer had been at home each night. The only night he had been absent was the night of Gerald's disappearance. She even contrived to get a glimpse of the interior of that cupboard in Mr. Boyne's bedroom. But the groceries intended for the poor widow of Notting Hill Gate were still there intact, as well as the tea kettle and the bowl. What had taken Gerald away? For 3 days, her anxiety increased. When on the 4th evening, on her return to Wimbledon, she found a telegram from him. It had been dispatched from the post office in Bristol Road, Birmingham, and read, "Returning very soon, dearest. Remain patient. Tell my sister. Love to Jerry." Time after time, she read it with complete satisfaction, and afterwards she went out to Ealing and showed it to her lover's sister. "That takes a great weight off my mind, Marigold," said Gerald's sister. "Still, his sudden disappearance seems very strange. I wonder why he's gone away, and why he's in Birmingham." "Yes," replied the girl. "It does seem curious, but think I know the reason." "What is it?" asked his sister anxiously. "A secret reason," was Marigold's reply. "I'm sorry that I can't tell you. Not unless he gives me permission." "What? Is anything wrong?" asked the young woman. "Oh, nothing wrong with Gerald. Not at all. Only he's trying to find out something. That's all. And until he is successful, I don't think he wants anyone to know his intentions." "Well, I hope he's made it right at his office. Employers don't like men who pretend to be ill at home and go away." "No doubt he has. Gerald isn't a fool," the girl replied, a little piqued at his sister's words, and very soon afterward she left for home. The message from Birmingham allayed her anxiety to a very great extent. When once Gerald took up any matter, he never left it until it was complete. He was the very essence of business, and his principal held him in high esteem on account of his method and his pertinacity. Marigold knew that. He was following some secret clue concerning the hooded man of Bridge Place, and it seemed as though he feared to put anything concerning it into writing. That night, as she lay awake, she reflected that the message was indeed very gratifying. Yet at the same time, she found herself wondering why he had not written her just a few brief words. She, however, kept her own counsel, feeling confident that Gerald would, as soon as possible, return to tell her what he had found out. The fact that the store of food in Boyne's bedroom was still there negatived the idea that it was intended for any person concealed in the locked room above. On thinking it all over, she began to doubt whether that curious cry was really human, or did it only exist in her imagination. Next day, she went to the bank as usual, but life was very dreary without Gerald's smiling face. He was her ideal of the fine, courteous man, strong, and devoid of that effeminacy which, alas, too often characterizes the temporary officers who so gallantly assisted in winning the war. He had neither pose, drawl, nor affectation, as is so common in and around Finchett Street. He dressed quietly, and his manners were gentlemanly without being obtrusive. He spoke little and listened always. In Marigold's eyes, he was the type of a perfect modern gentleman, as indeed he was. City life, with its morning rush to business from the suburbs and its evening scramble for a seat in bus, train, or tram, is to the business girl a wearing existence. The tubes with their queue, the trains with their packed compartments, the buses with their boorish attendants, and the trams crowded to suffocation with either rain-wet or perspiring humanity, are part of the life of a London business girl. Yet she is always merry and bright, for she takes things as they come and thrives upon a gobbled breakfast or a belated homecoming. Marigold Ramsay was typical of the London female bank clerk, eager, reliable, assiduous at her work, which consisted of poring over big ledgers all day beneath a green-shaded electric light until the figures, units, tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, and hundreds of thousands, danced before her tired eyes ere she closed her book and put on her hat to return home. On the night following the receipt of that gratifying message, she rushed back to Wimbledon wondering if any further telegram awaited her. But there was none. In disappointment, she sat down to her evening meal, the one problem in her mind being the whereabouts of the young man who was her lover and who had so mysteriously left her side and disappeared. He could not be following Boyne, for the latter was living quite calmly his usual uneventful life. Therefore, if he were not following him, why could he not write to her and explain? That point sorely perplexed her. Meanwhile, Aina Pollen telephoned twice a day to Golders Green to inquire how her friend Mrs. Morrison progressed, and on each occasion the matron would answer her. But the news was of increasing gravity. She sent kind messages, but the matron expressed regret that the patient was too ill to be given them. On the evening when Marigold had sped back to Wimbledon hoping for a further telegram, Miss Propert had, after telling the Red Widow how critical was Mrs. Morrison's condition, added that some relatives had come up from Brighton. Unfortunately, the doctor will not allow anyone to see her, she went on. Only this evening I have had a telegram from her sister in Scotland saying she is on her way to London. But as she gives no address, I am unable to stop her, so her journey will be useless. Useless? Why? Asked Dana. Well, I'm sorry to tell you that the doctor who saw her an hour ago holds out but little hope of her recovery. She has diphtheria in its most virulent form. Oh, how terrible, cried Aina. But is it really so very serious? Yes. There is no use disguising the fact. It is a most critical case. But surely there is no immediate danger? She asked, full of concern. The critical period will be within the next 24 hours, came the reply. If she gets over tomorrow night, she will probably recover. Aina Pollen held her breath, while her brows narrowed, and she made a strange grimace. Well, Miss Propert, you won't fail to let me know how my friend is, will you? Of course not, was the reply. I hope she will be better tomorrow morning. But, well, personally, I entertain but little hope. I have never seen a worse case of diphtheria. Aina hung up the receiver and, crossing the room, took a long sniff at her smelling salts. Then, going back to the telephone, she rang up Lilla and said briefly, Our poor friend is very bad indeed. I'll let you know how she is in the morning. Is Bernard there? No, he's just gone back, answered her friend. Well, I want you both to dine here tomorrow night. Will you? Why? You know the reason, surely. Oh, yes, yes. Very well, dear. At 7:30. So that was agreed. Next morning, just before noon, Boyne called upon Street and learned from Lilla, who had just spoken to Aina, that Mrs. Morrison of Carsfairn was in an extremely critical condition. Grunted her husband. Then all goes as it should, eh? No other acute disease presents so great a liability to sudden death as diphtheria. I suppose the doctor, whoever he is, has been all along examining the patient's heart for any indication of an approaching catastrophe. But sudden death can't take place, can it? Asked Lilla. Oh, yes, replied her husband in a voice of authority. The more insidious forms of sudden death from diphtheria take place through the nervous system and heart. In such a case, the pulse beats only 20 or 30 a minute, and that is probably what has aroused the doctor's fears. But, according to Aina, she hasn't a very bad throat. That may be so, he said, speaking in the way of a medical man. She may have an extension of the false membrane into the air passage, which would block the larynx, trachea, or bronchi, which is always gradual and may be fatal. But if the doctor has come to the conclusion that she's in a very bad way, I should think that the end will come this evening. You'll dine at Aina's? Of course I will. I'll be there just after 7, he said, and, after leisurely finishing a cigarette, he left her. Just before 7:30, he entered Aina Pollen's flat, where Lilla was already seated in the drawing room. He wore a simple blue serge suit. For that night, he had come straight from Hammersmith, and had not dressed to go to a restaurant or the theater. Well, he asked the Red Widow, anything fresh? Nothing. I telephoned to Golders Green an hour ago, and found Miss Propert was most despondent. Poor dear, laughed Lilla. What a pity. Her bill will be paid all right, so she needn't fret. Presently they sat down to a very pleasant little dinner, where, with sardonic laughter, the trio of death dealers lifted their glasses of champagne to dear Augusta's speedy recovery. After dinner, they returned to the drawing room, where they took their liqueurs and coffee, all three being in excellent spirits. The only serious moment was when the Red Widow suddenly remarked, "I don't half like the situation concerning that young fellow Durrant. Do you know, I feel some strange presage of evil. I mean that we may have made a slip there." "Slip?" laughed Boyne derisively. "Nothing of the kind, my dear Aina. I saw to that all right. And surely you can trust me. But suppose we have? No need to worry further about him. He won't trouble us any more." "The next person to be silenced is that girl," Lilith said in a hard voice. "Yes," was Boyne's slow reply. "I think I've formed a plan which will be just as successful as that we carried out concerning her too inquisitive lover." And as he spoke, he blew a cloud of smoke from his lips and watched it curl towards the ceiling. Suddenly, it was then about 10 o'clock. Almost as the words fell from his lips, the telephone bell rang sharply. All three started. "Ah!" gasped Dana, springing up. "There you are. At last." "Yes," she replied, taking up the receiver. Then, listening, she exclaimed, "Oh, you Miss Propert, well? Oh, how dreadful, how very sad. She passed away 10 minutes ago. Thank you so much for telling me. I'm so sorry, so very sorry." And she replaced the receiver. "You look sorry," laughed Boyne. "Really, it is most distressing to think that we shall very soon draw 10,000 pounds, he added mockingly, whereat the two women laughed gaily, for the coup so elaborately prepared had at last been brought off. Chapter 19. What happened to Gerald? The days passed, and Marigold, hearing nothing further from Gerald, called again at Mincing Lane, and there learned that they had not heard again from young Durrant. A clerk had been sent over to Ealing to inquire about him, but had returned with the information that, instead of being ill, he had not been seen by his sister. The firm at once suspected something wrong with the books, said the female clerk of whom she made the inquiry. But Mr. Durrant was such an honest, straightforward young man that we all ridiculed the idea. "Have the books been examined?" asked Marigold breathlessly. "Oh, yes, and nothing has been found wrong." The girl drew a sigh of relief. She then showed the clerk the telegram she had received from Birmingham, and she, in turn, promised to show it to the principal when he came in. Marigold Ramsay walked down Mincing Lane to Finchage Street in gloom and despair. She returned to the bank and sat at her books, unable to work, unable to do anything, save to wonder why Gerald had so suddenly left her. Yet he had bidden her not to worry over him and had promised to return. That evening she went over to Hammersmith, and her aunt, noticing how pale and worried she looked, inquired the reason, asking, "Have you heard yet from Mr. Durrant?" "No, Annie. Unfortunately, I haven't, but I'm expecting to hear every day." "Funny he went away like that, wasn't it?" the deaf old woman remarked, though inwardly she suspected that there had been some quarrel between them, and that he had left her in consequence. "Yes," replied the girl faintly. Then she asked after Mr. Boyne. "Oh, he's been away 4 days now. He said he was going to Wales on some insurance business, and would be away a week or perhaps 10 days. Unusual for him to go away, isn't it?" Marigold remarked. "Yes. He's never been away for more than a week together in all the time I've been with him." The girl left Hammersmith early, and, returning to Wimbledon Park, sat at her window and wept for a long time before retiring to rest. To her the world was empty and hopeless without Gerald. What had she done? She wondered that he should have left her in that fashion. That he was following Boyne was a mere excuse, she felt sure. It irritated her to think that he should try to deceive her. What was he doing in Birmingham? If there were reasons why he did not wish to return to London, then why did he not give her his address? And then she could easily have run up to see him. The more she thought it over, the more mystified did she become. The mystery was increased 3 days later when, on returning from the city, she found a telegram on the table in the narrow hall. Her heart leapt as she tore it open. It had been sent from Paris, of all places, and read, "Sorry could not write, dear. Do not worry. Shall be back soon. Have wired to the office. Love, Gerald. Love, Gerald," she repeated aloud to herself. "Oh, why does he not give me an address so that I can write to him? It's cruel. Very cruel of him to keep me in suspense like this, she cried in a frenzy of despair. She ate sparingly in the little dining room of the jerry-built villa. For nowhere is the jerry-builder more in evidence than in Wimbledon Park, with his white-painted gables and his white-painted balconies to his 6-roomed houses. But let us not misunderstand. It is best for the workers, the brains and backbone of England, to live in smiling houses, even though jerry-built, than in many of those gray, rain-sodden houses of the Midlands and the North, where the knocker-up pursues his calling each dawn and the factory hooter sounds all too early. Personally, the writer here declares that he has no love for the capitalist. The latter has too often, ever since the early Victorian days, been either a swindler or an aristocrat of bad intentions, and the jerry-builder was the natural outcome of his parting with his estate. Poor Marigold! She could go no farther in the maze of doubt and uncertainty. A dozen times that night she reread the mysterious but unconvincing message. She was a girl of high intelligence, or she would not have been employed by the bank. The whole affair puzzled her, as it would indeed have puzzled anybody. Next day after her luncheon, she went round again to Mincing Lane and made inquiry regarding the missing man. The same girl told her that the principal had received a mysterious wire from Paris. "I saw the telegram," she said. "It was from Paris, and was quite abrupt, saying that he would probably return in a week or so." "But what does it all mean?" asked the distressed girl. "I really don't know," replied the other girl. "Mr. Durrant's gone away, and that's all." That night Marigold went over to Ealing, and to Gerald's sister she showed the telegram. It puzzled her sorely. "Whatever can Gerald be doing in Paris?" she exclaimed. "Why could he not write to us?" "I don't know," was the reply of the unnerved girl. "I think he ought to send us some address." "But he may do so later," replied his sister. "Gerald is a man of business. He would realize how troubled we all are." "He seems to have faded out of existence," said the girl, seated in the front parlor of the neat little villa of the neat suburban road. "Yes," said his sister, "he certainly does. I await a letter each morning, but none comes." "But what can he be doing in Paris?" queried Marigold. "Without a doubt, he has lost the confidence of his firm. He pretended to be lying ill here, and they have found out that he isn't ill at all." "Yes. The other day, a middle-aged man came to see him, but I was forced to admit that he wasn't here, that he was missing," replied Gerald's sister. Marigold went home utterly dispirited. What did she do? It was useless to go to the police and raise a hue and cry regarding a man who, from time to time, telegraphed to his employers and to her that he was on the point of returning. So she was compelled to wait. Gerald Durrant had disappeared. He had sent her messages, it is true, messages of comfort, yet when she argued within herself, she saw that he ought, at least, to have given her some address to which she could reply by letter or by telegram. True, Boyne was absent, but he had only been absent for a few days, while her lover had been missing very much longer. For more days of blank despair crept slowly by. Seated beneath her green-shaded light at the bank, with her great ledger before her, Marigold reckoned up the columns of figures mechanically and handed them to be checked. They were accounts of all classes of merchants, mostly of profiteers, firms who had made fortunes out of the valor and blood of the gallant fellows who had given their lives for Britain. She felt so unhappy without her lover. Gerald, who had directed those investigations concerning the hooded man who was her aunt's employer, had disappeared with startling suddenness. Yet he had assured her that he was following some mysterious clue. The latter she had proved, by reason of the knowledge of Boyne's movements, to be non-existent. Was her lover deceiving her? That suspicion caused her the greatest irritation and annoyance. That evening she sauntered along Pont Street and looked up at the red brick house which Boyne had entered on that well-remembered night. But the place was in complete darkness, save for a light in the servants' quarters. Then again she went to Bridge Place and learned from the old deaf woman that her master had not yet returned. "He's having a very nice long holiday," said Mrs. Felmore. "And he deserves it, too. It's tramping about Hammersmith all day and in all weathers, as he does." 3 weeks went past, but no further word had come from Gerald, either to his principal, his sister, or to his well-beloved. Gerald Durrant had, truth to tell, met with some strange and startling adventures since the night of his disappearance. In the darkness on that well-remembered night, he was walking along the Kensington Road towards Knightsbridge, following Boyne at a respectful distance and keeping a wary eye upon him, without arousing any suspicion as he naturally believed. While passing the railings of Kensington Gardens, close to Queen's Gate, he saw a female figure lying upon the pavement with a lady bending over her concernedly. Hastening up, he found both ladies to be well dressed and inquired what had occurred. "Oh dear," cried the elder lady in great distress. "My sister has just slipped down on a piece of banana peel, I think, and she's broken her ankle. She can't move, and she doesn't speak. She has fainted. I wonder, sir, if you would be so kind as to call me a taxi." "Certainly I will," replied Gerald, with his usual gallantry. "If you'll stay here, I'll go back to the rank. I passed it a few minutes ago, and there was a taxi there." So he dashed back, got into the cab, and was soon on the spot where the lady, who had recovered consciousness, was standing on one foot, unable to put the other to the ground. "It's so extremely kind of you," said the elder lady, while the injured one expressed faint thanks. Then, assisted by the driver, the lady was seated in the conveyance. "I really don't know how I shall get her up the stairs," exclaimed the elder woman. "We live in a flat up at Hampstead, and we have no hall porter." Gerald reflected a second, and suddenly recollected that Boyne was now out of sight, so that by that unfortunate accident he was prevented from further following him. "I shall be very pleased to accompany you, and give you what assistance I can," he said. "May I get in?" "Certainly. It's too kind of you," the injured lady declared. "I fear we are encroaching upon your time, but the taxi can bring you back to wherever you want to go." So Gerald got in, while the elder lady gave the man an address at Hampstead, some mansions, the name of which he did not catch, for at the moment he was in conversation with her sister. All he recollected were the words, "It's close to Hampstead Tube Station." Next moment they drove off, whereupon the elder lady introduced herself as Mrs. Evans, and her sister, she said, was Miss Mayne. "We lived together," she went on. "My husband was unfortunately killed on the Somme, so we are companions for each other." Meanwhile, Miss Mayne was evidently suffering extreme pain. "I'm so sorry, dear," her sister exclaimed. "But as soon as we get home, I'll ring up for Dr. Truman. He'll no doubt soon set it right." "Can you move your ankle, Miss Mayne?" asked Gerald, who had, in turn, already given the two ladies his name. "Unfortunately, no, not in the least. To try to move it causes me excruciating pain. I really don't know what I shall do." "Oh, surgeons nowadays are wonderful," exclaimed Gerald cheerily. "Probably it is only a simple sprain. At least, let us hope so." So completely engaged in conversation was Gerald that he did not notice along what thoroughfare they were traveling. Indeed, the driver had taken an intricate route behind Regent's Park, a district quite unknown to the young man. From the ladies, he learned that they had been dining with a lady living in Phillimore Place, and were on their way back to Knightsbridge Tube Station on their return home when the accident happened. That they were refined, well-bred ladies was unquestionable, therefore he was genuinely concerned. At last the taxi stopped before the entrance to a large block of inartistic-looking flats, and with difficulty Miss Mayne descended. Then, assisted by the driver and Gerald, she, with great difficulty, ascended to the first floor, while her sister opened the door with her latch key and switched on the light. Within it was a cozy, well-furnished abode, just as one would expect to be the home of two refined women of good position. Mrs. Evans paid the driver, giving him half a sovereign over his fare and saying, "I shall want you to take this gentleman back to the West End presently." "So wait." "Very well, Mum," replied the man, pleased with his tip, who then retired. Then, turning to Gerald, she said, "You'll stay a few minutes, won't you? I'll telephone to the doctor." This she did, the telephone being out in the hall, and while he sat with Miss Mayne in the small drawing room, he heard her sister in conversation with Dr. Truman. "He'll be here in about a quarter of an hour," she exclaimed, as she re-entered the room. "How fortunate, dear, to find him in." "Yes, I do hope he'll give me something to dull this terrible pain," replied the other. "No doubt he will," said Gerald encouragingly. "It is too bad of people to throw fruit peel about the pavements." I've had more than one narrow escape from falling myself. It's positively criminal, declared Mrs. Evans with warmth. Of course you'll stop now and see what he says. Mr. Durrant, she went on, I'm only too happy to have been of service to you. You'll have something? She suggested. I'm just going to get my sister a little brandy, and I'll get you a whiskey and soda. No, thanks, all the same, Gerald replied. The fact is I never drink whiskey. Then a glass of port wine, she laughed gaily. You won't refuse that. Have it, to please me, won't you? He tried to protest, but she overruled him, and in the end he was forced to accept the glass of wine, which a few minutes later she brought him upon a small silver salver, together with her sister's liqueur glass of old brandy. She took nothing herself, but stood chatting as Durrant and her sister sipped their glasses. That's some very old port that was lately given to me by a friend, she explained. Being a woman, I know nothing of wines, but we had a man dining here with us the other night who pronounced it first class. Yes, Gerald said. It is excellent, though I, too, have no knowledge of wines, which I always think is generally pretended save in the case of men with acute palates who are in the import trade. The man who today can sip a glass and tell its vintage is a rara avis, he declared. Mrs. Evans agreed with him. She watched him drain his glass with satisfaction and then urged him to have a second one. But he refused, for, as a matter of fact, he found a strange sensation creeping over him. Though he did not mention it, being too polite, he felt across his eyes a slow but increasing blindness. Objects seemed to be receding from his gaze. The muscles of his throat seemed to be contracting, and he felt his cheeks hot and flushed. He tried to stir himself in his chair, but he seemed paralyzed. He could not move. He endeavored to speak, to tell the two ladies of his sudden seizure, but his tongue refused to articulate a word. In his desperate efforts to ask them to call assistance, his hands pawed the air convulsively, and then, of a sudden, he felt himself collapsing, and all became blank. Meanwhile, the two women were watching him intently, and the instant they satisfied themselves that he was unconscious, Miss Mayne, who was really Lilla Brayborn, sat where she was, while Mrs. Evans, who was Ana Pollen, the Red Widow, jumped up from her chair, saying eagerly, All's well up till now. I must tell Bernie. She dashed to the telephone and, asking for a number, spoke rapidly. Lilla speaking, she said. Bernie. He's here, and he's been taken suddenly ill. You'd better come round at once. She listened. Then she said, Right. You'll get here in a quarter of an hour. He's asleep now. Then the pretended invalid and her pseudo-sister, leaving Gerald in the drawing room, where he had collapsed so suddenly after drinking the glass of doctored port, went into the dining room and mixed themselves a stiff brandy and soda each. Afterwards the Red Widow, descending to where the taxi was waiting, gave the man another 10 shillings and said, The gentleman has changed his mind. He's staying here. All right, Mum, the man replied. Thank you very much. Good night. Starting his engine, he drove away well satisfied. Chapter 20. The Room of Evil. A quarter of an hour later, Bernard Boyne stood in the room where Gerald Durrant lay back in the armchair, pale as death, quite unconscious. So you tried to get the better of me, my young friend, did you? He laughed as he stood before the inanimate figure. But you dropped into the trap just as I intended. I could easily put you out of the way, you infernal young prig, but it might be dangerous. No, cried Ana anxiously. The body would be found, and Scotland Yard may possibly find traces of us. No, carry out your plan. Telegrams, a motor car journey, a pretty story, and goodbye. Yes, but this fellow and the girl who is in love with him are distinct dangers, remember. True, but it was the girl who aroused his suspicions. Send her underground, if you like, and as soon as you like, for none of us have any love for her, have we? Ana, he said, his manner suddenly changing, an idea regarding the girl, Marigold, has just occurred to me, one that cannot be investigated and nothing can be brought up against us. Leave her to me. Oh, we will Bernie. But recollect, she must have a dose and go out. That's the only way to put the tombstone over this affair. We don't want any unwelcome inquiries or any resistance by the insurance company. Don't fret, my dear Ana. We shan't have any real trouble, I assure you. We are now dealing with it in advance." Then, turning to his wife, he exclaimed, "Those necessary telegrams? You have them already. Get busy and send them. I've arranged with Jimmy in Birmingham and Hilda in Paris to send others at certain times." "Great Scott, Bernie, your brain is wonderful," exclaimed Ana in admiration. "How can you think out all these details in such a short space of time? When one is in danger, one takes due precaution, and at once." "I always do so," he laughed. "This fellow and his girl have tried to spy upon us, and we have to deal with them as they would deal with us. If they discovered anything, they would at once tell the police, and very soon our game would be up. Hence, we have to put matters square at the least possible risk to ourselves," he added. He took up the glass from which Gerald had drunk the excellent port, and carried it into the small kitchen, where he carefully washed it. Afterwards, Ana handed him a small phial, which he also carefully washed, and then half filled it with something he took from his pocket. The bottle was full of that cheap, but pungent, perfume, oil of verbena. When he had half filled the small bottle, he corked it and placed it in a cupboard in the kitchen, thus removing all trace of the deleterious liquid which the little phial had previously contained. Lilla had gone out, but half an hour later she drove up to the door in a small open car. The manner in which she pulled up showed her to be a good driver. The inhabitants of the whole block of flats, those houses piled upon one another, which are admittedly cheap to run, but which are so very expensive from a health point of view, were asleep when, assisted by the two women, and treading softly, they placed Durrant in the car, heavy and unconscious owing to the drug which had been given him. Lilla then mounted to the driver's seat, and, leaving Ana to close the flat and return to Upper Brook Street as best she could, Boyne and his wife, with their unconscious victim in the bottom of the car, sped out across Hampstead Heath and northward upon the Great North Road. Not till 48 hours afterwards did Gerald Durrant slowly and painfully awake to a knowledge of his surroundings. By that time, Marigold and the others had been reassured by the telegrams. Gerald's first impression was of a strange, rather healthful smell, a smell of tar. He looked around. The ceiling of the room was low, a ceiling which badly required whitewashing. Before him was a small square window, a very small window, and he was lying fully dressed upon a narrow iron bedstead. Apparently the house was an old cottage, but quite unfamiliar. He tried to think, but his brain was addled. His memory refused to serve him. The sun was shining in at the window, and the little room seemed close and stuffy. It was the sunset, he gathered. Try how he would, he could recollect absolutely nothing. All he could recollect were the faces of those two women whom he had assisted in their distress. He strove to think. At last, he recollected how Mrs. Evans had given him that glass of good port, and how afterwards they had chatted together. Then all was blank. Of time he had no idea. What, he wondered, would Marigold think of his absence? And what would they think at the office? His first impulse was to wire to Wimbledon Park and to Mincing Lane. Yes, it was imperative that he should do so. Yet he knew not where he was, for as he raised himself upon his elbow from the bed, he saw that the only lookout from the small window was a high brick wall, apparently the wall of a warehouse. The room was dusty and uncleanly. There was no carpet, nothing save a very ragged square of black and white linoleum. He got up and, dazed as he was, he tried the door. It was strongly bolted from without. He shouted, yelled at the top of his voice, but nobody came. Upon the little deal table, he saw something which told him that he was a prisoner, a jug containing some water, and a plate with some unwholesome-looking cooked meat and some bread. He examined them with a rising feeling of indignation. Then, in a fury, he raised a heavy wooden chair and savagely attacked the door. Time after time, he took it by its leg and banged it upon the door, making a tremendous noise. Yet the strong oak resisted every attempt, until, piece by piece, the chair was broken up. Then he looked around for something stronger. There was a rusty iron fender. This he took up, and using it as a battering ram, struck the door repeatedly. But the fender being of cast iron broke in half, but made no injury to the door. He crossed to the window, and, smashing the glass, tried to open it. But outside were strong iron bars. He was indeed a prisoner. In desperation, he flung the mattress from a bed, and, taking down the bedstead, attacked the door vigorously with one of the iron bars. He used the end, for it was hammered out, as a crowbar and succeeded after long effort in inserting it between the door and the lintel, but so well was it secured by bolts that he had no power to force it open, and in the end the thin iron bent, and thus became useless. Presently he hammered on the floor, and tried to awaken somebody, still all to no purpose. In the meanwhile, darkness was falling, and soon he would, he knew, be without light. Notwithstanding that his head was aching terribly, and there was a feeling as though his skull was slowly being crushed in a vice, he set to work to liberate himself in another way. He tore aside the old linoleum and succeeded in forcing up one of the dirty floorboards. This he followed by another, and yet a third, until below was revealed the plaster of the ceiling of the room underneath. Then, taking a heavy piece of the bedstead, he struck down with all his might. The iron struck the plaster, but, contrary to his expectation, he was unable to force a hole through the ceiling. Then, suddenly, to his dismay, he discovered that what he had believed to be plaster was concrete, that the floor was a fireproof one, and that being so, any attempt to penetrate it without proper tools was foredoomed to failure. He gazed about him, utterly bewildered. What could have happened after he had drunk that glass of port so kindly offered him by the handsome Mrs. Evans? That he was in the hands of enemies it was plain, but who were they? He wondered whether his incarceration in that place had any connection with his inquisitiveness concerning Bernard Boyne. He reflected. Boyne had not been cognizant of being followed. He was convinced of that. Had he been so, he would not have paid those nocturnal visits to Pont Street and Upper Brook Street. In the evening light, he stood utterly perplexed. At his feet, he saw that the boards were discolored by a large brown stain some 3 feet in diameter. One part of it was thick, as though dark paint had been spilled there. He bent to examine it more closely, and from the wood scraped a portion of the thick substance with his fingernail. The stuff seemed curiously sticky, very much like paint. He took it across to the window, and there examined it minutely in the light, rubbing it between his thumb and forefinger. Next moment, a cry of horror escaped him. "Great heavens!" he gasped. "Why, it's blood." Apparently, there had been a pool of blood there, but it had nearly all dried up, save that portion which had not yet become completely hardened. What could it mean? He returned to the spot which had been immediately beneath where he had lain upon the bed. Had some previous occupant of that barred room been foully done to death while sleeping? It certainly seemed that such was the explanation. "Who brought me here? I wonder," he said aloud to himself, as the ghastly suggestion crept over him. "What is Marigold thinking of my disappearance? When they think of it at the office?" Across the narrow room, he paced in frantic anger at having been so entrapped without the slightest motive. The dead silence of the place oppressed him. Without knowledge of where he was, either in London or in the country, he set his teeth and regretted the moment when he went to the assistance of the 2 women. Yet, surely, they could have nothing to do with his detention there. The absence of motive held him completely perplexed. In the fast-fading light, he made a complete and minute inspection of that chamber, wherein he had made the gruesome discovery. If someone had really been done to death in that place recently, then there might be other traces of the tragedy. Further, how was he to know that he, in turn, would not fall a victim? Hastily, because the light was going, he turned out a cupboard, but found nothing save a quantity of newspapers. Some rubbish in the rusty fireplace he examined, but his search there was also fruitless. Then he turned his attention to a long, narrow double-doored cupboard let into the wall close to the bed. One door was bolted from within, and the other locked. To force it open was only the work of a few moments. Within he found a quantity of feminine apparel of good quality, a skirt, shoes, and other things. One object which he took up caused him to ejaculate another cry of horror and to hold his breath. He carried it across to the broken window, and there bent to see if what he suspected was the actual truth. Yes, he satisfied himself that it was. What he held in his hand was a woman's cream crepe de chine blouse, prettily trimmed with lace, but the neck, chest, and all over the left sleeve were stained with blood. Then the victim was a woman, he gasped aloud. Quickly he examined all the other articles of attire, but found no traces of blood upon any other. He decided to keep his knowledge to himself, so that when he escaped, as he intended to do, he might at once inform the police of what he had found. Therefore he instantly set to work to replace the floorboards, and recover them with the old piece of linoleum which hid the great ugly stain. Then, restoring the room to order in the best way possible, he replaced the blouse and the other feminine garments where he had found them, and was able, after a great deal of difficulty, for it was nearly dark, to place the two doors of the cupboard together in such a way that they closed, so that all trace of them being forced was thus removed. That some unknown woman had recently lost her life in that place was now quite certain. After he had put the place in order again, all save re-erecting the bedstead, for this could not be done, neither could he mend the broken chair, he stood in the darkness pondering. It was impossible to remain in that horrible place all night. If he slept he might be attacked, as the poor woman had probably been, and in his half-dazed condition he needed sleep badly. His one thought was of Marigold. What will she think? Poor girl, he cried aloud in his anguish. What has she done now that I am missing? He listened. There was no sound save the chiming of a church clock in the distance, followed by the shrill whistle of a locomotive. Then he heard the long-drawn siren of a ship repeated 3 times, but some distance away. Evidently, the place was near a river, or perhaps by the sea. That would account for the smell of tar. Then all became quiet again. The silence and darkness began to get upon his nerves until he could stand it no longer. The thought that a dark tragedy had been perpetrated upon that very spot where he stood filled him with horror. Therefore, at last he again went to the window and began to send up some unearthly yells in a fierce endeavor to attract the attention of somebody outside. Time after time he repeated his shouts, but nobody answered. He could hear the voices of 2 common women gossiping, and though he could not see them, he shouted to them. But they only deigned to yell back, "Oh, shut up. Do shut up, whoever you are." Suddenly he recollected that drunken brawls and cries for help are only too frequent in lower-class neighborhoods. Therefore his cries for assistance, though they must be heard, were being disregarded. So he desisted, and resolved to remain patient a further quarter of an hour, and then resume his cries for help. He was standing in the darkness near the window when a slight and curious movement behind him caused him to turn sharply. Beneath the door he saw a light, but whoever was there wore rubber soles to their shoes, for they made no sound. The slight noise which had fallen upon his strained ears was the slow and stealthy drawing of a bar outside the door. Someone was creeping noiselessly in. On tiptoe he crossed, and, seizing the bar of iron, sprang behind the door, his hand raised ready to fell any person who entered. The handle of the door was very slowly turned, but next second, ere he became aware of it, a strange thing happened. Chapter 21. Lost Days. As the door of the room in which he was imprisoned slowly opened, and he stood ready to attack the newcomer and fight for his liberty, he became suddenly blinded and rendered utterly powerless by a burst of heavy gray smoke. He drew one whiff of it, and, reeling, fell senseless upon the floor. Then, as the fumes which had rendered him unconscious slowly cleared, there stood in the dim light a form wearing an exact replica of the white cloak and hood which Bernard Boyne used when he visited that upstairs room in Hammersmith. The window being broken, and now that the door was open too, the fumes quickly dispersed, yet Gerald lay there where he had fallen, pale as death, and breathing only slightly. "A heavy dose," laughed the hooded man grimly. "He won't get over it for quite a long time." And then he turned and left, leaving the door still open, so that all trace of the poisonous vapor which he had released from a heavy iron cylinder should be removed. An hour later he returned, but without his cloak, for the gas mask was no longer needed. He carried an electric torch, which he flashed into the white face of the unconscious victim. "You'll soon go away, never to return," growled the mysterious man aloud. And then suddenly by the reflection of the light his face became revealed. It was Bernard Boyne. "The fellow knows too much, and so does the girl," he muttered to himself. "We must deal with her next." but she's not yet dangerous. Still, as Lila says, in our business we can't afford to take any risks. So stay there for the present, my friend, he added. And bending, he felt the prostrate man's pulse in the professional manner of a medical man. Then, apparently well satisfied, he crossed the room, closed the window, and, after locking the door outside again, descended the stairs. When young Durrant at last began to slowly recover his senses, he awakened to find himself seated in an armchair in a small and not uncomfortable cabin on board a ship. The vessel was rolling heavily, and ever and anon the waves swept up past the porthole, partially obscuring the light. He drew his hand across his fevered brow and endeavored to think. But all was hazy, uncertain, and unreal. Was he still dreaming? He asked himself. He placed both his hands upon the arms of the leather-covered chair and felt them. No, it was no dream. He was on a ship at sea. Suddenly across his brain swept recollections of that room in which he had been imprisoned. That gruesome chamber with its unmistakable evidence of a tragedy. The place in which some unknown woman had been foully done to death. He remembered his meeting with those two ladies outside Kensington Gardens, their hospitality and its dire result. At any rate, there was one satisfaction, that his enemies, whoever they were, had spared his life. He rose, his limbs feeling very sore and stiff. How long had elapsed since he had so suddenly met that mysterious burst of smoke, he had no idea. Nor had he any knowledge of where he had been, or where that room of tragedy was situated. All remained a complete blank. In rising to his feet, he nearly fell owing to the heavy roll of the vessel. A steamer, evidently, for he could feel the vibration of the engines. Unsteadily he opened the door, and found himself in a narrow gangway, with several cabins on either side. Opposite him a door stood open, revealing a burly, dark-bearded man in uniform lounging in a chair, smoking a pipe and reading a book. Hearing Gerald's footsteps, he turned his head. "Hello," he cried roughly. "Got over your drunk then, Mr. Simpson? Come in here." "Thanks," was Durrant's reply. "But I never drink, and my name is not Simpson." "Ah, I thought you'd say that." "Sit down. Anyway," the captain remarked with a good-humored laugh. "Yesterday when we had a chat, you didn't deny that your name was George Simpson, did you?" "I don't remember having had a chat with you yesterday," replied Gerald, amazed at the captain's words. "Ah, you don't remember much, do you? Got a very bad memory, I know." "No, I've got a pretty good memory, and to my knowledge I've never seen you in my life before. And yet you spent last night with me, and drank more than you ought to have done. Whiskey is a bad thing for you, young fellow. You should leave it alone. Never drink till you're 45. That's what I say." Durrant sank into the chair and gazed around the captain's cabin absolutely bewildered. "What ship is this?" he asked at last. "You asked me that yesterday." "This is the Penturch of Sunderland, bound from Hull to Singapore," was the reply. "And we're on our way there," gasped the young man in blank dismay. "Yes, 3 days out." "Where are we now?" "Off Finisterre." "Will you tell me your name, Captain?" Durrant asked quite calmly. "Bowden, John Bowden, and I live at Empress Villa, Queen Street, Sunderland. Aged 41, married, 2 kids. Anything more?" "Yes, a lot," was the other's reply. "You asked me a lot of questions about the ship last night, and I told you. We've got a general cargo, and after Singapore we go to Batavia, then to Wellington, New Zealand, and back home." "How long shall we be away?" "Oh, perhaps 9 months, perhaps more if I get other orders," was Bowden's breezy reply. "This old tub ain't very fast, you know. She isn't one of your slap-up liners. We never have passengers. I don't like 'em. Only Mr. Morton asked me to take you out for the benefit of your health, and I consented." "Mr. Morton? Who's he? A friend of yours, isn't he?" "I don't know anyone of that name," declared Gerald, astounded. Captain Bowden looked straight into the young man's face for a few moments in silence, and then, nodding his head, said, "Ah, of course." "Why of course?" asked Gerald in annoyance at the captain's tone. The other only shrugged his shoulders and continued puffing at his big briar pipe. Gerald was utterly mystified. Since that moment when he had lost consciousness in the presence of the 2 ladies he had assisted until the present, all his recollections were blurred and indistinct. Bowden had accused him of drinking heavily the night before. Yet he felt certain that he had never previously set eyes upon the black-bearded man before him. His unknown enemies had spared his life, but they had sent him out upon a 9-month voyage, evidently to get rid of him for some reasons known to themselves. Was Bernard Boyne at the bottom of it all? He wondered. Yet Boyne could not know anything of his efforts to unravel the mystery of his life. How could he possibly know? "Look here, Captain Bowden," he said firmly at last. "Let us be frank with each other." "I'm always frank, young man." "Too frank for some people," was the bluff seafarer's reply. "Well, be frank with me. Tell me, do you know any man named Boyne, Bernard Boyne?" "Never heard the name before," snapped the other. "What about him?" And he crossed his legs encased in his heavy sea boots. "Well, I thought perhaps you might know him," Durrant said. Then, catching sight of the coat he was wearing, he was surprised to see that it was unfamiliar, a heavy blue serge suit, such as he had never before possessed. The mystery increased as each moment passed. "No, I don't know any man named Boyne." "Who and what is he?" "He's an insurance agent at Hammersmith." "That's somewhere in London, ain't it?" "Yes. I'm a Londoner." "Oh, are you?" "Yes, I thought so." "Why did you think so?" asked Durrant. "Because I know you come from Liverpool." "You're trying to be funny." "Oh, no, I'm not. It's you who always tries to be funny, young fellow. You sat with me here in my cabin last night, and yet today you deny having done so." Gerald rose from his chair, intending to firmly withstand the black-bearded fellow's ridiculous allegations. But at that instant he felt that same half-intoxication creeping over him, and he subsided. "Captain Bowden, I'm sorry to tell you that I honestly think you are lying to me," he said a moment later. "Thanks for the compliment, Mr. Simpson. I won't retort because you'll be ill if I do. We're in for bad weather in the bay, I'm afraid. Glass falling with a run." "I've never been to sea before," remarked Gerald hopelessly, yet surprised that the captain should take his challenge so mildly. "Well, you'll get your sea legs on this voyage, I can tell you," laughed the heavy-jowled captain. At that moment the first mate came in, holding himself as he stood against the heavy rolling of the tramp steamer. "Cargo is shifting a bit in number 4 hold, sir," he said. "Shall I tell Jenkins to call them in and see to it?" "Yes. Do what the devil you like, Hutton," snapped the captain. "I see we're in for hellish weather. Look at the glass. I noticed it half an hour ago, sir. We shall catch it strong after sundown." "Yes, we shall. Better make everything tight now." Then, turning to Durrant, Captain Bowden, refilling his pipe, remarked, "That's the worst of these cursed old tubs. But you see, after the war they can't get new ones. All those labor troubles on the Clyde have interfered with shipbuilding. I was promised a brand new boat a year ago, but she's still on the stocks. When she goes out, I shall do the ferry trade from the Levant to London, for weeks out and home. But, now tell me, who put me on board this ship?" asked Gerald. "Who put you on board?" "Why, your friend, Mr. Morton." "My friend? Why, I don't know the man." Bowden smiled and showed that he was not convinced. "What was this fellow Morton like?" inquired Durrant eagerly. "Describe him to me." "Oh, a rather tall, lean, herring-gutted chap with a baldish head and narrow little eyes," was the reply. "But you can't tell me that you don't know him." "Why, you were with him when I promised to take you on this trip." "With him?" echoed Gerald. "I certainly was not." The worst of you, Mr. Simpson, is that you're so forgetful," exclaimed the breezy captain. "I'm not forgetful," cried Durrant resentfully, rising to his feet again and steadying himself from the slow roll of the ship. "How did you come and know this mysterious friend of mine? Morton, you say, is his name? That's my affair. You don't believe me, so why should I bother to answer your questions?" "I don't believe you when you say that I was here with you yesterday," was Gerald's frank reply. "No, because your brain is addled," laughed Bowden deeply, knocking the ashes from his pipe. At that moment the ship's bell clanged loudly, marking the time. It was 11 o'clock in the forenoon. "Yes, it is addled, I admit," said Durrant. "I've been the victim of a foul plot. Well, let me tell you." "Oh, I don't want to hear it all over again. You've already told me twice how you assisted 2 ladies in Kensington, how they took you to their house and gave you a dose of drug. Then, how you found yourself in prison in a house, and all that long rigmarole. Spare me again, won't you?" the captain begged. Durrant stood aghast. But I've never told you anything about it, he said. I've never told a living soul about my strange adventure. Look here, Mr. Simpson, said the captain, rising from his chair with slow deliberation. I'm beginning to think that you're not quite in your right senses. You told us all about it last night in this very cabin, how you had been entrapped, drugged, and taken away. Yes, that is quite true, but I have never told anyone of it. Well, the less you say about that affair, the better, I think. Nobody will believe you. But don't you think I'm telling the truth? No, I know you are not. Morton told me that you were obsessed by the belief that you've been the victim of some very cunning plot, and that you were drugged, said the captain. Now, just forget all about it, and enjoy your trip, he added good-humoredly. Ah, this person Morton has told you, has he? He told you so as to discredit me when I explained to you the truth, cried Durrant. But what I have told you are the true facts. Oh, of course they are, laughed the captain. But don't let us discuss it any more. Where did I come on board? Why, at Hull, of course. 4 days ago. At Hull, gasped Gerald. I have no recollections of ever having been in Hull. Neither have you any recollections of ever having been born, remarked Bowden, with biting sarcasm. Did Morton bring me on board? Certainly. And he paid you to take me on this trip? No, excuse me. We pay you. You've signed on as steward at a bob-a-day wages. We're not licensed to carry passengers. The Board o' Trade don't like such old tubs as the Penturch. Yet she's a good old boat. I'll say that much for her. You'll see England again, all right. Never fear, unless the bloomin' boilers burst. They're none too strong, I'm afraid. You're not over cheerful, Captain Bowden, the young man remarked, more puzzled than ever at the extraordinary situation. Oh, I'm cheerful enough. It's you who seems to be a-worryin' over things. Well, and wouldn't you worry if you were drugged, waking first to find yourself locked in a strange room, and then again wakening a second time to discover yourself at sea? You want rest, my dear young fellow, rest. And you'll get it here on the old tub. The weather will be better when we get along the west coast. How can I send a message to London? We ain't got wireless. Too expensive for such a hooker as this. It means an operator with lightning round his cap. So you'll have to wait till we get to Singapore, and then you can cable. Wait for 5 or 6 weeks till the vessel arrived at Singapore. What would Marigold think? What is she thinking now? He was, of course, in ignorance of those cleverly worded and reassuring telegrams. Can I get a message ashore anyhow, by signal to one of Lloyd's stations? He begged. No, you can't, for we're going straight out. Usually we go up the Mediterranean and through the canal, but this trip we're going round the Cape. But surely you will allow me to communicate with my friends. Captain, he urged in distress. You certainly could if we had orders to put in anywhere. But we haven't. I can't send a letter to my missus, for instance. She'll know of our arrival at Singapore because the owners will send her a line, as they always do. All this is maddening, declared Durrant, angrily stamping his foot. Yes, Morton said you were a bit eccentric, and it seems that you are, remarked Bowden, taking down his shiny black oilskin which had borne the brunt of many a storm. I must go on the bridge, or Hutton will be cursing, he added. Get your oilskin, you've got one in your cabin, and go and have a blow on deck. It will do you good, blow out the cobwebs, and freshen up your memory a bit. Gerald returned to his cabin and found a black oilskin hanging behind the door. He put it on and, taking an old golf cap, ascended the hatchway to the deck, which was, ever and anon, being drenched with salt spray. A glance around showed the Penturch to be a dirty old tramp, which was loping along in the teeth of a northerly gale. See yonder, exclaimed the captain, pointing to a little line of land. That's the last bit of Europe we'll see. Tomorrow the weather will be a lot better. Have a look round the ship before dinner. And don't you trouble about that marvelous plot against you. There's nothing at all in it. Take it from me. Your friends are all aware of your hallucinations, and they're much pained by them. So just keep quiet and rest all you can. While Bowden ascended to the bridge to relieve the first mate, Gerald explored the ship. He came across 1 or 2 rough sailors, who either wished him a sullen good day or stared at him as though he were some new species. As a matter of fact, Bowden had given out to the crew that their passenger was an eccentric but harmless young man who was laboring under the delusion that an attempt had been made to kill him. Hence the men's curiosity. Gerald Durrant was in used to the sea, and in his present unstrung condition, he was indeed scarcely responsible for his actions. But what the captain had told him had astounded him. The description of his mysterious friend Morton, a man who was evidently his enemy, certainly did not tally with that of Bernard Boyne. Yet he could not erase from his mind the suspicion that Boyne had had a hand in that plot by which he had been carried away from London, just at a moment when his presence there was so much needed. Again, as he stood against the hatchway, gazing wistfully at the distant French coast that was fast disappearing, the thought suddenly occurred to him that if his disappearance was actually due to Boyne, then the latter must have, somehow or other, discovered the fact that he was keeping him under observation. If Boyne had really found it out, then he would also know that Marigold had been assisting him. This would, no doubt, lead him to suspect the real motive of her 2 stays at Bridge Place. Bernard Boyne would entrap her, just as he had been entrapped. In his despair, he saw himself powerless, either to warn or to assist the girl he so fondly loved. Chapter 22. From out the past. After Boyne, his wife, and Aina Pollen, the trio of death dealers, received the news of the death of Augusta Morrison, the go-to-meeting insurance agent of Hammersmith had left the flat and gone forth into Upper Brook Street. He had to meet a man in the smoke-room of the Carlton. Suddenly, as he passed beneath a street lamp on his way towards Park Lane, a well-dressed girl accosted him, exclaiming with a strong French accent, "Ah, Monsieur Bennet, at last. I have wanted to see you for so long time." Boyne started. The maid, Celine, for it was she, was the very last person in the world that he desired to meet at that moment. All had been successfully conducted concerning Augusta Morrison, but here arose the aftermath of a very ugly affair, the death of old Mr. Martin in Chiswick. At first he pretended not to recognize the girl who had been paid off by Aina, for he hoped to wriggle out of the precarious situation by bluff. "No, monsieur," cried the girl. "Surely you recollect me. I am Celine, who was maid to Madame, your friend. You remember poor Mr. Martin, who died so suddenly, eh?" she asked. He tried to extricate himself, but instantly it occurred to him that she was resuming her blackmail, and that if they were to save themselves, she must be paid more money. She knew something concerning old Martin's sudden end. That was plain. Therefore, she would have to be silenced. In every walk of life today, the blackmailer of both sexes is to be found in one guise or another. "And are you really Celine?" he laughed, halting beneath the next lamp, for she had joined him and had walked beside him. "I am. Madame lives in the house you have just left. I saw her in Melon a little time ago. She so kindly called upon me." As the girl uttered these words, a man joined them, a tall, rather cadaverous-looking stranger in black, evidently a Frenchman. "This is Monsieur Gaultier, Henri Gaultier," she explained, introducing them. "Ah, I recollect. Madame told me that you are to be married." Celine? "I congratulate you," said Boyne in an affable manner. "Pardon my foolishness, but at first I did not recognize you as my friend." The latter word was intentionally diplomatic. "Yes, I thought you would recollect," said the girl. "Is Madame upstairs? I want so much to see her." "No," replied Boyne. "She isn't. I'll just call, but she's out. There are lights in her windows," remarked the man Gaultier in very good English. "Servants, I suppose," said Boyne carelessly. "I myself went to see her upon some business, about some shares upon which she has asked my advice. She's gone away for the weekend, it seems." Grunted the Anglo-Frenchman. "How are we to know that?" "Well, I tell you so," was Boyne's blunt response. "Do you know, Monsieur Bennet, that Madame told me that you were dead? That you died of influenza, and here now you are coming from her house," said the good-looking French girl. "Yes, she believed that I was dead. I was away on business in Italy, and some fool spread the report that I had died in a hotel in Naples," laughed Boyne, yet inwardly full of concern. "But it was a shock to her when one afternoon I called." Celine Tennant was not convinced. She had already received 30,000 francs to keep a still tongue, but as a matter of fact her lover, Gaultier, saw that it would be interesting, in more ways than one, to probe the mystery of the death of old Mr. Martin. The ill-assorted trio walked together as far as Park Lane. At the corner the man Gaultier halted, and addressing the girl in French, said, We'll go back, Celine, and see if Madame is really absent, as Monsieur Bennet alleges. She is away, exclaimed Boyne angrily. Haven't I told you so? Don't I want to see her myself? The Frenchman laughed in his face. No, no, my dear monsieur. Do not tell any more lies. We saw you going a long time ago. You dine there, and Madame is there. We both want to see her on some important business. Bernard Boyne held his breath. He was cornered. He had successfully put Gerald Durant out upon the high seas. But here was Celine, with her lover, watching them enter Anna's flat in order to await the news of the death of their latest victim. It's surely late to do business with a lady, remarked Boyne, for want of something else to say. In his excitement over the successful conclusion of the Morrison affair, he was now met with a very unexpected and serious contretemps. Anna believed that she had successfully settled with the girl, but it was evident that Gaultier was a blackmailer who intended to bleed them to the utmost. Indeed, he had not been long in revealing his hand. I think, Mr. Bennet, or whatever your real name may be, you had better drop this mask, the Frenchman said, with a sardonic grin. Let us come down to the same plane. The fact is you're a crook, and so am I, perhaps. Now then, what about it? Let's walk along, the girls suggested in French. The trio walked together, Bernard Boyne between the pair. They strolled down Park Lane to Hyde Park Corner, but their conversation was mostly in monosyllables. Boyne was wondering how he could extricate himself from the highly perilous situation. It was evident that this shrewd Frenchman, who had so suddenly risen in the placid firmament of their future, knew something concerning the death of old Martin. How much did he know? That was the question. At first Boyne tried to fence with the pair, but soon he saw that it was of no avail. They both laughed at him openly, and it was clear that they had been watching him for several days. Now, slid Gaultier, as they halted upon the pavement opposite the Hyde Park tube station. What are you going to do? Will you take us back to Madame? Or are you going to lie to us further? Now then, Boyne saw himself at a dead end. He had never dreamed that the smart French girl of Melun, who had been paid so handsomely by Anna, would again resume her claims. But, of course, the man Gaultier was behind her and had, no doubt, prompted her. Fortunately, they could know nothing of the Morrison affair, or, indeed, of the clever plots which they were conducting against other perfectly innocent victims. Life assurance is always a gamble, but when one can guarantee death within dates, then one holds a winning hand every time. Madame isn't at home, repeated Boyne sulkily. Call there on Monday. She'll be back then. No, my dear Monsieur Bennet, replied the clerk from the Mairie of Chantilly. If we call then she will have gone, and so will your wife. And he laughed lightly. You see, I haven't been in London all these weeks without discovering something about all three of you. But I don't see why you should come over from France to pry into our affairs. What can it benefit you? Asked Boyne, who, though excited, kept cool with difficulty. Oh, never fear, it will benefit us. We know how and why old Mr. Martin died so unexpectedly in Chiswick. We shall also know, ere long, how other insured persons have died, mon cher ami. So we had better turn back and have a little business chat with Celine's late mistress and with your wife. That, perhaps, will clear the atmosphere. Ah, I see you want money. Both of you, snapped Boyne. Possibly, was the hesitating reply. But perhaps it would be to our better advantage to tell the police what we know. That's a threat, cried Boyne indignantly. I allow no man to threaten me, he declared boldly. Go back to Madame's house. You are welcome. I'm not her keeper. I would prefer to deal with you first, Monsieur Bennet. I don't want to have any dealings with a person who holds out threats, was his answer. Madame paid Celine because she dismissed her without notice, he went on carelessly. Just act as you wish, and I wish you joy, but please don't bother me further. He was turning away when the Frenchman rushed after him and stood on the pavement before him. Is this your final decision? He asked fiercely as he barred Boyne's way. Yes. You've come here to blackmail me, replied Boyne, but you'll not get a sou out of me. Why should I pay you anything? I don't know you. I've never seen you before in my life. But you will be very pleased to settle, snarled the fellow in English. I shan't, and if you're not very careful, I'll give you in charge of the police for attempted blackmail. You swine, cried Gaultier between his teeth. The same to you, my dear friend, and a size larger, A bigger breed, laughed Boyne defiantly. Both the man and the girl were silent for a few moments, when the latter suddenly broke out into a torrent of abuse and vituperation. Her companion tried to calm her, but in French she cried loudly. These people are assassins. I know what I overheard on the night when poor Monsieur Martin died. They killed him, and he was always very good to me. Poor Monsieur. Madame is a fiend, she went on. I do not want her dirty money. I want to see her pay the penalty which all those who murder should pay. Boyne saw that his bluff had not succeeded. He had to deal with a very perilous situation. A false step might lead them all to the Old Bailey. The pair had evidently been watching them, and were aware that his wife and Aina were both in the flat. Well, he laughed harshly. You both appear to be on the wrong track. Celine has, it seems, suspicions about something which she once overheard. What it was, I do not know because I wasn't there, but I tell you, both of you, that as far as I care you can go to the devil. I've nothing to ask of you, nothing to fear. You really mean that, cried the lank, bony Frenchman. Certainly I do. Clear out, and now at once. Otherwise I'll call the first constable and give you in charge for attempted blackmail, said Boyne, standing erect before him. We've had foreign blackmailers here before, lots of them, but we've no use for them in London. But Madame paid me to say nothing, urged Celine. What Madame did does not concern me in the least, he snapped. She generously gave you something, I believe, because she considered that she had treated you shabbily. That's all. An awkward pause ensued. Very well, exclaimed Gaultier. We are enemies. Let it be so. Of course we are enemies. Boyne cried in a defiant tone that rather nonplussed the Frenchman. Très bien, he exclaimed. Excellent, said the wily Boyne. Let it be so, as you say. We are enemies. So go back to Upper Brook Street and find Madame. Go and try to blackmail her. Meanwhile, I shall call the next constable I meet and give you both in charge as undesirable foreigners. The Frenchman, however, only laughed in his face, saying, Yes, do so, mon cher ami. I fancy you would regret such an action. But we are enemies, and, at any rate, I intend to see Madame, your friend. You want money, growled Boyne, as they stood together on the curb. Perhaps we do, and perhaps we do not. It all depends upon your attitude, and Madame's, he replied, with mock politeness. The mystery of the death of Monsieur Martin requires elucidating, and Celine can do that when it becomes necessary. I don't understand you, Boyne said. What about the old man's death? Now, that's quite enough, cried Gaultier in impatient anger. It's no use you, of all men, pleading ignorance, Mr. Bennet. Celine has already had a little present from Madame to keep a still tongue. And you want a bit more? Asked Boyne bluntly. No, that's just where you are mistaken, my friend, was the Frenchman's reply. Monsieur Martin died in mysterious circumstances, of which both Madame and yourself are well aware. And it is but right that the police should know the truth, otherwise we may have other people dying in a similar manner. Those last words of his caused Boyne to wince. For what reason, if not with the object of blackmail, had Henri Gaultier and Celine Tennant come to London and tracked them down? He knew that Aina had been indiscreet in her conversation after old Martin's death, but he had believed that her visit to Melun and the payment to the girl had put matters quite right. It seemed to him, however, that Celine was entirely under the influence of that municipal employee from Chantilly, whose attitude was decidedly hostile. Well, Boyne asked of the man, if you don't want money, what in the devil's name do you want? I want to prevent you from playing any more of your hellish tricks upon innocent people. That's what I want, was the Frenchman's hard reply, in a tone which left no doubt as to his firm intentions. Chapter 23. The Cry in the Night. Marigold, hoping against hope, went each day from Wimbledon to the bank, where she sat adding and subtracting figures, always wondering. Each morning, after a hurried breakfast, she dashed to the station and hung upon a swaying strap till she got to the city. Each evening, she repeated the same experience home. Gerald was missing. No further word had come nigh him. She waited as each day passed, waited eagerly, but he gave no sign. Each day, she went to eat her frugal meal at the same little place, but his familiar figure never appeared in the doorway, as she knew it so well. His sister had heard nothing, and at Mincing Lane they were beginning to think that he had simply left his post without notice, perhaps in order to better himself. For Marigold, the days passed wearily enough. Where is he? True, he had sent her reassuring telegrams, but even they had ceased. He had given no address. Therefore, she was unable to reply. She was, of course, in utter ignorance that her lover was on the high seas bound for the Far East, and that the reassuring telegrams she had received were forgeries. The abnormal brain of Bernard Boyne worked quickly and ever with criminal intent. He was possessed of the criminal kink and was also possessed of a supermind for the evasion of any attempt at detection. Such men, Jack the Ripper of London, Romer of Madrid, Lightning Lasky of New York, and the Ermito of Rome, all of them famous criminals who have never been discovered by the police of Europe, though traps were set for them by the dozen, were exactly on a par with the humble insurance agent of Hammersmith, the highly popular Busy Boyne. One evening, 3 days after the news had been forthcoming concerning the death of Mrs. Morrison, Marigold went over to see her aunt at Hammersmith, arriving there about 7 o'clock. "Hello, my dear," shouted old Mrs. Fellmore, when she entered the downstairs kitchen. "Well, and how have you been, eh? Heard anything of Mr. Durrant yet?" "Not a word, Auntie," replied the girl wearily. "And funny enough, Mr. Boyne's gone away. I haven't seen him these last 3 days. I can't think where he can be. I have a kind of feeling that something must have happened to him," said the deaf old woman. "Why, Auntie?" asked the girl, placing her handbag upon the table and sinking into a chair. "Well, he's never gone away like this before. He always tells me when he intends being away. When was he at home last?" 3 days ago. He went out in the evening, and he's not returned. I've had to feed poor little Nibby, or he'd be starving," replied the woman. "Yes, Auntie, it is curious that Mr. Boyne isn't back. It's so lonely here. I get such creepy feelings at night, dear," said the woman. "It's bad enough to be here all day alone, but, well, I don't know, but I have a feeling that something is going to happen." That feeling would have been greatly increased had she but known that, not 10 minutes before, Boyne had stood at the corner of the street and watched the girl enter his house. Indeed, he had waited outside the bank and had seen Marigold come out. Then he had followed her, and with satisfaction, when she had taken the underground to Hammersmith. As he followed her in the crowd along the street, he muttered some sinister words beneath his breath. "I have dealt with your lover. Young lady," he growled to himself. "Now I must lose no time in dealing with you. You have only yourselves to blame for trying to poke your noses into my private affairs." Then he watched her disappear down the area steps, and afterwards crossed the bridge and made a call upon a man he knew who lived in Castelnau Mansions. Old Mrs. Fellmore got her niece some cold meat and tea, for the girl had taken off her coat and hat, having decided to spend the evening with her aunt. Much of their conversation concerned Gerald Durrant. The abrupt manner of his departure was, of course, a complete mystery, but the old woman inwardly had her doubts. What more likely than that Durrant, like so many other young men, had grown suddenly tired of Marigold and had faded out, sending those reassuring telegrams in order to lighten the blow which he knew the poor girl would receive. This, indeed, was her fixed opinion, though naturally she said nothing of it to her niece. "Auntie," said the girl presently, "I can't help feeling that something serious has happened to Gerald. I seem to become more apprehensive day by day. Until I can't work, I can only sit and think and think." "No, no, dearie," exclaimed the old woman cheerfully. "You mustn't let it get on your nerves. Those telegrams he sent told you not to worry. And I wouldn't, if I were you. It will all come right in the end." "Ah," sighed the girl. "Will it? That is the question. Time is going by, and we hear nothing. He's probably in Paris or somewhere, on some confidential business for his firm. But his firm know nothing of his whereabouts. Well, if he had gone on some secret business, they would naturally profess ignorance," the woman pointed out. "Do you know, I'm half inclined to go to the police and consult them," Marigold said. "Ah, that's not a bad idea," her aunt replied. "Go to the head police station just outside the Broadway and ask their opinion. They would take his description and advise you what to do, no doubt." "I'd go tomorrow." "I shan't have time tomorrow," the girl said. "I'll go round now. It's only 9 o'clock." And, putting on her hat and coat, She went along to the headquarters of the T Division of Metropolitan Police. But as she passed along the streets, a dark figure went noiselessly behind her, the sinister figure of Bernard Boyne. She was going in the direction of the Underground Railway station, hence he concluded that she was on her way home. He, however, received a rude and sudden shock when he saw her halt beneath the blue lamp and ascend the steps of the police station. "Phew," he gasped aloud. "Whatever is she there for? To give evidence against me. To put the police upon my track. By Jove, there's no time to lose. It must be done tonight." Next instant he turned, and going to the railway station, he obtained a leather handbag from the cloakroom and hastened with it back to his house. He wore rubber heels to his shoes and moved swiftly and almost noiselessly. In the darkness, he ascended the steps and opened the front door with his key. There was no light in the hall, and he could see through the Venetian blind of the kitchen that Mrs. Felmore was below. Without passing into the sitting room, he went straight upstairs to the mysterious apartment in which the hooded figure lived in secret. First, he placed his handkerchief over his mouth, and then, opening the door, passed in and switched on an electric torch which he produced from his pocket. Without hesitation, he unlocked the heavy bag and took therefrom a long, narrow deal box, which he opened, apparently to make certain that nothing was broken within, and then, placing it upon a table, drew down a little electric switch which was fitted at one end of the box. Afterwards, scarcely looking around, he left the room, relocked the door, and crept out of the house without anyone having seen or heard him, old Mrs. Felmore being quite unconscious of her master's secret visit. Back at the end of Hammersmith Bridge, Boyne glanced at his watch. Then, chuckling to himself, he hurried to the police station in order to watch Marigold farther in case she had not already left. When the girl had told the sergeant on duty the reason of her visit, she was passed upstairs into a room where she was seen by the inspector of the Criminal Investigation Department attached to the division, a clean-shaven, fresh-complexioned man who listened to her story very attentively. From time to time, he took notes of names and addresses. "Have you any of the telegrams which the missing man sent you?" he asked presently. From her handbag, she produced 2 of the messages, which he read carefully. "And since the 23rd of last month you've not seen him?" he asked. "No," replied the girl. "And in Mincing Lane they have heard nothing since the receipt of the last telegram?" "Nothing. Neither has his sister." The inspector looked her straight in the face and said, "I presume, Miss Ramsay, that this gentleman was a particular friend of yours, eh?" Marigold blushed slightly and responded in the affirmative. "Is there any reason you suspect why he should have gone away so suddenly? Did you quarrel with him, for instance?" "Not in the least. We were the best of friends," she answered. "I came here to ask whether you could assist me in finding him." The clean-shaven man drew his breath and gravely shook his head. "I fear that we shall be unable to help you," he replied. "Why? He is missing. Surely the police can trace him," she cried in disappointment. "No, he is not missing," was his answer. "The fact that he sent those telegrams is sufficient to show that he is keeping out of the way for some purpose best known to himself. He has, no doubt, some secret from you." "Secret from me?" she echoed in dismay. "No, we both had a secret." The inspector only smiled. He, of course, thought she alluded to the fact that they were lovers. She saw his amusement and wondered whether she dare be frank and tell him of their suspicions concerning Mr. Boyne. Yet the thought flashed across her mind that the story of his visits to that upstairs room, clothed in that strange garb, would never be credited. The London police hear strange stories from hour to hour, many of them the result of vivid imaginations, of hearsay, or deliberate attempts to incriminate innocent persons. Malice is at the bottom of half the fantastic stories told by women to officers of the Criminal Investigation Department, and Marigold saw that even though she told the truth, it would not be believed. Yet could she eliminate the real reason why her suspicions had first been aroused? She resolved to be frank. Therefore, after a brief pause, she said, "The secret shared by Mr. Durrant and myself was concerning a certain man resident close by here." "Oh, and what is it?" asked the officer eagerly. "Well, we have certain suspicions regarding a gentleman named Boyne who lives in Bridge Place." "Boyne? Why, not old Bernie Boyne, the insurance agent. Yes. Do you know him? Oh, well, he's well known about Hammersmith, was the inspector's discreet reply. What about him? There is something about him that is mysterious, declared the girl. Very mysterious. And what's that? Well, Mr. Durrant was helping me to watch his movements when he suddenly disappeared. Ah, that's interesting. Did Boyne know you were watching? No, he had no suspicion. We watched him go to 2 houses, one in Pont Street and the other in Upper Brook Street, Marigold said. At night, he dresses smartly and goes into the West End. A good many men do that, miss. By day, they earn their money honestly by hard work, and at night fritter it away up west. I don't really see what there is in that. Isn't there anything else you know? Marigold hesitated. She feared to tell him of the strange disguise. Well, my aunt is Mr. Boyne's housekeeper, and I know that a room at the top of the house is kept locked. A good many upstairs rooms are kept locked. There's nothing much in that, I think. But I heard noises inside, a human cry. The inspector looked at her, with disbelief written upon his rosy countenance. Are you quite sure of that, Miss Ramsay? He asked seriously. Yes, I heard it, was her firm reply. Then because of that you and Mr. Durrant believe that Boyne has somebody in hiding upstairs. Is that so? She replied in the affirmative. And you don't think Boyne discovered that you were watching him? If he did, I think he would have resented it very much, for I've met Boyne once or twice. Indeed, I passed him in King Street an hour ago. You passed him. Perhaps he's back then. My aunt hasn't seen him for 3 days. Well, I saw him in King Street tonight, but he didn't see me. Then, after a pause, he added, I think, miss, you're mistaken regarding Mr. Boyne. I only know him slightly, but I know in what respect he is held in the neighborhood, and how his praises are upon everyone's lips, especially the church people. Then you don't think that he has anything to do with Mr. Durrant's disappearance? Not in the least. I should dismiss that idea from my mind at once. But how about that locked room? Your aunt will be able to fathom that if she keeps her eyes open, he said. And as for Mr. Durrant, you'll no doubt hear from him very soon. To me, it seems perfectly clear that he has some hidden motive for keeping out of the way. Are his accounts at the office all right, for instance? Quite in order. Blackmail may be at the bottom of it. That accounts for the mysterious disappearance of lots of men and women. But who could blackmail Mr. Durrant? You don't know. A little slip a year or so ago, and the screw is now being put on by those who know the truth. Oh, that is an everyday occurrence in London, I assure you, Miss Ramsay. Then you can't help me to find him? She asked eagerly, after a brief silence. I don't see how we can act, was the officer's answer. Had he disappeared without a word, we would, of course, circulate his description and a photograph. If you have one. Yes, I have one, she said anxiously. Good. But that is useless to us, for the simple reason that, after leaving you, he has sent you messages telling you not to worry. In face of that, how can we assume that anything tragic has happened to him? No, my dear young lady, he added. I fear we cannot help you officially, much as I regret it. 5 minutes later, Marigold descended the stairs and walked out into the dark road utterly disconsolate and disappointed. Gerald was missing, yet the police would raise not a finger to assist her in tracing him. Yet, after all, as she walked back to Bridge Place, she saw quite clearly that there was much truth in the detective inspector's argument. Gerald had not suddenly disappeared and left no trace. He had urged her not to worry, and the inspector had advised her to keep on hoping for his return. Later she sat in the kitchen with her aunt and related all that had passed at the police station. I quite agree with the inspector, declared the deaf old woman. The police can't search for every man who goes away and sends telegrams saying he is gone. You see, Mr. Durrant hasn't committed any crime, for instance. So there's no real reason why the police should act. If he hadn't sent telegrams, the case would be so different. With that view, the girl, greatly distressed and broken, had to agree. It was then nearly 10 o'clock, and at her aunt's suggestion, Marigold resolved to stay the night and keep the old woman company. You can have the same room you had a little time ago, she said. It is aired, for I always keep hot water bottles in it in case it may be wanted. If you went home now, you wouldn't get there till 11:30. Besides, It's more cheerful for me. I'm beginning to hate this place now Mr. Boyne never comes near. The inspector said he saw Mr. Boyne in King Street tonight. Marigold said. Bosh, my dear, was old Mrs. Fellmore's prompt reply. He wouldn't be in King Street without coming home. It was somebody else he saw, no doubt. And that was exactly what Marigold herself thought. Soon after 10:30, Mrs. Fellmore put out the light, and they both went to bed. For half an hour Marigold lay awake thinking it all over, and thinking of the last occasion she had slept in that room, and of the mysterious chamber upstairs whence had issued those strange human cries. Then at last, tired out, she dropped off to sleep. How long she slept she knew not, but suddenly she was awakened by men's shouts, and next instant found the room full of smoke. There was a roaring noise outside. Half suffocated, she groped her way to the door frantically, only to find the staircase above in flames. "Auntie! Auntie!" she yelled, not recollecting that her aunt was deaf, but by dint of fierce courage she got to the old lady's room. As she entered the door, Mrs. Fellmore, half choking, met her in the red light thrown by the flames, and together they sprang down the staircase along the hall, and, after fumbling with the chain upon the door, dashed out of the house to where a number of people, including 3 police constables, were awaiting the arrival of the fire brigade. Meanwhile, the top floor of the house was burning fiercely, the flames going up through the roof for many feet, and as there was rather a high wind, the sparks were flying everywhere. Bernard Boyne's long deal box had sent petrol about the room of mystery at the time to which it had been set, and already all evidence of what was contained there, and of the mysterious origin of the fire, had been obliterated. The insidious death dealer had hoped to include Marigold and his housekeeper in that relentless plot to destroy all that might incriminate him. But he was mistaken. Marigold Ramsay, though in her night attire, and who had fainted in the arms of Constable, had escaped unscathed. Chapter 24. Hard-pressed. When Celine Tennant and Henri Gaultier so suddenly appeared outside Aina's flat as the dark shadow of menace at the very moment of the diabolical triumph of the death dealers, Bernard Boyne realized that, in order to escape, he would have to summon all his wits. The death of old Mr. Martin in Chiswick was an ugly affair, a very ugly affair, and Celine more than suspected. She knew that somehow by the old man's death all 3 had profited. At first Boyne was furious to think that Aina's visit to Mellon, and the payment of that respectable sum, had been of no avail. But next second he had seen that the only means of escape was to keep up his identity as Mr. Bennet, to temporize with his pursuers, and then to effect an escape. He saw that, at all hazards, he must prevent the pair of blackmailers from facing Aina and Lilla. Therefore, when the Frenchman had expressed that hard determination that he wanted to prevent him from playing any more of his hellish tricks upon innocent people, he had stood in his path upon the pavement and replied, "Now, Monsieur Gaultier, just pause for a moment and think. Aren't you a fool? Celine's late mistress has been very good to her, and now you come here and create trouble." They were standing together against the railings of Hyde Park, not far from the taximen's shelter. "I wish to create no trouble," declared the Frenchman in very good English. "Only trouble for you," he snarled. "That is extremely kind of you," Boyne retorted. "But if you still continue to threaten me, I shall take measures to protect myself and also to retaliate." "You have denounced me as a blackmailer," the Frenchman snapped. "I was wrong," said Boyne apologetically. "I withdraw those words. Naturally, at first, I believed you wanted more money." "Then you believed wrong," was the reply. "Our object in coming to London is to see Madame and yourself, and to investigate further the death of Monsieur Martin." "Well, that you are perfectly at liberty to do," Boyne said, with affected carelessness. "I have nothing whatever to fear. If you like to waste your time and money, do so." "Celine knows the truth," retorted Gaultier. "Then let her go to the police and tell them." The London police pay little heed to the statements of discharged servants, especially if they are foreigners. "Yes, I will go," cried the French girl excitedly. "You are assassins, assassins. You, both of you, killed poor Monsieur Martin." "I think you will have to prove that," replied Boyne, remaining very calm. "Hush, Celine," said her lover. "We do not want a fracas in the street." "Bah, the man thinks we are afraid of him." But we are not. We're here to get at the truth about poor monsieur. Well, mademoiselle, you are at perfect liberty to institute inquiries, Boyne replied. But before you go to the police as you threaten, just pause and ask yourself what all this storm in a teacup will profit you and your friend. The vivacious girl shrugged her shoulders. Remember that Madame is your friend, he went on. She told me that she has recently been in Paris and called upon you in Melun. Madame, since you left, has several times expressed regret to me that she was abrupt. Because she believes that I know your secret, cried Mademoiselle, interrupting. Let us walk on, suggested Boyne, turning purposely towards Knightsbridge. There are some people trying to overhear our conversation. Gaultier saw a man and two women who had halted close by, probably attracted by the loud tones in which they were conversing. Strange conversations go on in the London streets at night, as every police constable knows. The night world of London is an amazing world, of which the honest go-to-bed-early citizen knows nothing. One half the world of London is ignorant of what the other half does o' nights. They moved on past the taxi shelter towards Knightsbridge, which was in the opposite direction to Upper Brook Street. I think you are certainly not fair to Madame, Boyne said very quietly to the girl. She, out of her own generous heart, for no better-hearted woman ever lived, sought you out because she felt that she had treated you unkindly. Of course, I do not know the real facts, but on the face of it I think you, Mademoiselle, treated your late mistress with ingratitude. I say this, he went on, in a perfectly friendly spirit. You may have formed some unfounded suspicion regarding poor Mr. Martin's death. Why, I don't know. Because I heard the truth from Madame's own lips. Some distorted words half overheard, I suppose, he laughed. My dear Mademoiselle, it is always very dangerous to interfere with the death of anybody, because here in England there is such a thing as a law of slander and of libel, criminal libel, which means that those who make false accusations may be committed to prison. Therefore, before you go further, I advise you to consult a solicitor. He will no doubt advise you. We will see the police first, declared Gaultier. I have not the slightest objection, laughed Boyne. If you think it will avail you, go to Scotland Yard. That is the head office of the Criminal Investigation Department. And he paused, but I tell you this, monsieur, if either of you make any accusations against Madame or myself, we shall at once prosecute you. And further, if you escape back to France, we will follow you there and prosecute you. Here, in England, we will not permit foreigners to come over and give the police a lot of trouble for nothing. So make whatever statement you like, but don't forget you will have to substantiate it with witnesses. Otherwise, you'll probably both find yourselves in prison. That's all I have to say. Good night. And, turning abruptly upon his heel, the master criminal walked back towards Hyde Park Corner, leaving Mademoiselle and her companion utterly perplexed. Bernard Boyne, as he hurried up Park Lane on his return to Upper Brook Street, muttered to himself, I've given them something to think over. They'll hesitate, and while they hesitate, we must act. It would have been fatal for them to have met Aina, and especially tonight, of all nights. 10 minutes later, he was back in Aina Pollen's room, where she was sitting with Lilla. What's happened? Asked his wife, for the paleness of his countenance betrayed that something was amiss. Oh, nothing serious, was his reply. Give me a liqueur brandy, he stammered. Aina went at once to the dining room and brought a little glass of old cognac, which he swallowed at a gulp, and then sat for a few moments staring straight before him. Tell us, Bernie, what's happened? Where have you been? Demanded his wife. Well, I've been right into the camp of the enemy, he said hoarsely. Enemy? What enemy? Celine is here. Want to see you. The fellow Gaultier is with her. They're on the track of old Martin, and want to see you. The two women exchanged glances, for the light in the faces of both had died out. Celine here, gasped Aina. How much does she know? How can we tell? I've simply defied her. But why didn't you offer to pay? They of course want money. Rapidly he described to the two excited women what had occurred. Then at last Lilith said, Well, the only thing we can do is to sit tight. We must, if we are to get the money paid on dear Augusta's policy. Of course, we can't slip out, or it would be an admission, if Celine really goes to the police. There is nothing to prevent her, remarked Aina. The girl is dangerous. So is that girl Ramsey. I've always said so, Lila declared. Her lover is out of the way, and the sooner she herself is silenced the better. For as long as that pair are alive, they will always be a menace to us. I quite agree, said the red-haired widow. You said that many weeks ago. Well, it is all in Bernie's hands. It's no use getting the insurance company to pay without taking due precautions to protect ourselves, is it? Asked Boyne's wife. The death dealers thereupon took counsel together. For an hour they sat discussing plans, each putting their idea forward. In the whole of criminal London, no three persons were so callous, so ingenious, or so regardless of human life. They had discovered a means of making money with little exertion and with certain results. Boyne, expert as he was in insurance and of a scientific turn of mind, could deal death whenever and wherever he desired, and in such a manner that no coroner's jury could pronounce a verdict other than that death had supervened as a natural cause. Not before 3 o'clock in the morning did Lila and her husband leave Upper Brook Street, and when they did, an elaborate and ingenious plan had been decided upon, which left no loophole for discovery. Mrs. Augusta Morrison of Carrsfairn had died, and Ana would, of course, excuse herself from going to the funeral. She had mourning which, as a matter of fact, she had worn on more than one occasion when a wealthy friend of hers had died. But in this case, she dared not put in an appearance. At home in Pont Street, Boyne sat with his wife and discussed the situation at considerable length. You must get rid of that girl Marigold, she said very emphatically as she lounged upon the silk-covered sofa in the elegant little room. She suspects something at Bridge Place, just as her lover suspected. Well, we've successfully sent him off, and he can thank his lucky stars he didn't get a dose. I only wish now I had given him a little dose that would have caused him trouble about 10 days after he sailed, Boyne said. Yes, Bernie. Recollect I suggested it. They could have buried him at sea, and we should not have been troubled by him any further. I was a fool not to take your advice, Lila. You always are. But take my advice about the girl. She's distinctly dangerous, a menace to all of us. And so is your menage at Hammersmith, especially if Celine really does go to the police. You should end it all, and above everything close Marigold's mouth. That girl is the greatest peril we have before us. Her husband, who had lit a cigarette and was lounging in a chair, agreed with her. But, he said, how am I to do it? We are in a devilish tight corner, Lila. The game has been a great and very easy one up to now. Nobody has ever yet tumbled to the scientific insurance stunt, and there's lots of money in it. We found it so. We've got between us 80,000 or so, a very decent sum, and we can make $1 million given a quiet market. Look at the lots of red or golden-haired women who are wealthy and who are not of any use on earth. Life assurance companies are always on the lookout for business and pay commission to any and every little tin pot agent who can put through a proposal. Remember that young fool of a solicitor in Manchester, and there are hundreds about the country everywhere. That's so, Bernie, replied his wife in a matter-of-fact tone, she having taken a cigarette to smoke with her husband. But here we have a peril before us. We were never in such a tight corner before. This may finish us. Oh, my dear Lila, don't get flurried. I am not. The fellow Durrant is on the high seas as a man who has had a nervous breakdown. Oh, that description. What a godsend it is to us all, isn't it? Nervous breakdown is responsible for 1,001 evasions of the law. Theft, bigamy, assault, forgery. In fact, almost any crime in the calendar can be committed and ascribed to the nervous breakdown of the defendant. We've a lot to be thankful for from the doctors, Lila, he said. A lot to be thankful for. Well, she said, puffing thoughtfully at her cigarette, if the secret of Bridge Place were exposed, then I fear that you couldn't ascribe it to a nervous breakdown, eh? Boyne laughed. No, Lila, you are always alive. You are amazingly clever, he declared. I did my best with that French girl, Celine, but, well, I'm not quite certain whether she won't go to the police and make a statement. Ah, I see, Lila said quickly. So we ought to clear out, and quickly. Out of London, but not abroad. But not yet. If all of us left suddenly, the insurance company might get scent of a mystery, especially if Celine says anything about old Martin to the police. But what of Marigold? Has she any suspicion that Durrant is on the sea? None. Durant telegraphed to her to urge her to be patient and that he will return. So she's waiting, and she'll wait a long time. Really, Bernie, you are wonderful. That was a glorious idea of yours, those telegrams. Yes, they've worked well, he said. Both the girl and his sister, as well as the fellow's employers, have all been reassured. But the girl is a menace, I repeat, the woman declared, and as such you must see that her activity comes to an end. There are a dozen ways in which you can manage it. Adopt one of them, and lose no time about it, she urged. Yes, he said in a hard voice. I ought to have taken your advice long ago. Well, take it now, she said. There are enemies around us, Celine, Gaultier, and this girl Ramsay. So be careful. We are in very serious peril. True. How serious we have yet to learn. But let's remain cool, and we shall most certainly win. Almost as he spoke, however, the electric bell at the front door rang, causing them both to start. Whoever can it be at this hour? Gasped Lilla, jumping to her feet. Wait, said Boyne in a changed voice. I'll go down and see. He did so. Lilla stood breathless, listening. She heard him unbolt the door and open it. Then she heard him give vent to a loud cry, half of surprise, half of terror, as a man's deep voice spoke. Chapter 25. The Recluse. The commotion caused in Bridge Place by the fire at Mr. Boyne's was not of long duration, ere the fire brigade arrived. However, so swift was the fire that the two top floors were gutted, thus destroying the secret of that locked chamber. A woman who lived a few doors off, and who knew Mrs. Fellmore, gave the deaf old woman and her niece shelter, and while the police kept back the crowd at both ends of the street, the 4 engines which had arrived were soon pumping water upon the roaring flames. The house was an old one with much woodwork, therefore it burned like tinder, and Marigold had certainly only escaped with her life. The superintendent in charge of the firemen had already ascertained that no person remained within, and the men in their shining helmets, their figures illuminated by the glare from the flames, were clambering across the neighboring roofs with their hose-pipes. Soon the flames were got under by the powerful rush of water, but not before the roof had fallen in, and only the ground floor remained intact, while the houses on either side were badly damaged. Every now and then, when a beam fell or a portion of wall collapsed, showers of sparks shot upward, and there was a burst of flames through the smoke. A fire in any crowded district of London at whatever hour always attracts a large number of onlookers. That night was no exception, for a big crowd had assembled at either end of the street, and in the center of the crowd towards Hammersmith Bridge, wedged between several women of the lower class, stood a shabbily dressed man in a golf cap watching intently the progress of the fire. He watched it with satisfaction, and saw the flames as they descended and burst through the windows of the second floor. When the roof fell in, he smiled, though none noticed it. The man saw that all evidence of his diabolical work had been destroyed, for he was none other than Bernard Boyne. What had happened to Marigold and her aunt? He asked the woman standing next to him if any people were in the house. Yes, they say there's 2 women and a man there, was the reply. The man got out, but the 2 women have been burnt to death. Poor dears. Ain't it terrible? They were asleep when the fire broke out. The firemen haven't got the bodies out yet. Terrible, declared the man in the golf cap, and then he elbowed his way out of the crowd, filled with satisfaction. As he did so, a youth shouted, "Lucky for him, eh?" Both the women got out just in time. "Is that so?" asked Boyne. "Yes," said the youth. "One of the firemen has just told me. There was a girl there, wasn't there?" Boyne queried. "Yes, she was got out, with an old woman." "Where are they?" "They say they're in a house just along there," was the reply. Boyne held his breath and went on. At first he had believed that his dastardly plot had been successful, and that Marigold had fallen a victim to his clever machinations. At least, the 2 upper floors had been destroyed and certain evidence wiped out. The clock, the pocket lighter, and the child's rubber air ball filled with petrol, which had been in the box he had so silently introduced into the house while Marigold was at the police station, had done their work just as he had intended. But he was filled with disappointment and chagrin when, after several other inquiries of firemen and others, he became convinced that old Mrs. Fellmore and her niece had escaped. At last, After watching until the excitement of the scene had died down and the crowd was dispersing, he learnt from one of the firemen. He dare not be seen by a police constable, for most of them knew him by sight, the house in which the two half-suffocated women had taken shelter. Then he turned and trudged all the way back to Pont Street, for, dressed as he was, he did not wish to get there until the servants had retired. He had made another great coup. It was true, but the peril of Marigold still existed. That was the one thought that obsessed him as he strode up the long Kensington Road, past the Albert Hall, and on towards Hyde Park Corner. The night of Augusta's death had been fraught with sufficient perils in all conscience. He recollected the unexpected appearance of Celine and her companion, of how he had defied them, and how, later that night, a caller had come to Pont Street, a caller who could not be refused admission, the man who had for so long been in hiding in that upstairs room, which had now been totally wiped out by the flames. "I shall have to reappear at home tomorrow, full of surprise," he muttered to himself, as at last he let himself into the house in Pont Street, the door of which Lilla had left purposely unbolted. Next day about noon, carrying a suitcase and dressed as he usually was when going about his duties in Hammersmith, he arrived in Bridge Place utterly amazed at finding his house wrecked and ruined. A constable was on duty, a man who knew him. "Well, sir," exclaimed the man in uniform, "this is pretty bad, ain't it? The fire broke out late last night, but it's fortunate the two women got out in time." "What?" gasped Boyne, apparently staggered at the sight. "What's happened?" "I've been away in Liverpool, and have only just got back." "Well, that deaf old woman will be glad you're back, sir. She's been round to the police station telling Em that you were away." "Where is she?" "In the house over there," and he pointed to it. "You said there was another woman in the house. Who was she?" "A girl. The old woman's niece, I've heard. She's all right, and went away early this morning." "Oh, yes, I know her. Came to keep the old woman company while I was away, I expect," he said. "But how fortunate they were saved. How did it happen? Does anyone know?" "The superintendent of the brigade was here about 2 hours ago, and they examined the ruins. They think that the fire must have broken out in the top room upstairs. I went over it with them. We found a lot of fused glass, which rather puzzled them." "Oh, yes. A lot of bottles I kept upstairs. I suppose they melted in the heat," Boyne replied. "Did they find anything else?" "No, nothing of any importance." "Then they don't know how it broke out?" "No, except that there must have been something up there very inflammable, they say, for the fire spread so quickly." "Perhaps it was a bottle of benzene I had up there for cleaning my clothes," said Boyne. "But, in any case, it's rough luck on me, for I'm not insured." "Sorry to hear that, sir," replied the constable. "They said, you being an insurance agent, you would be certain to be covered against loss." "No, it's the old story over again," Boyne said with a grin. "The shoemaker's child is the worst shot. I was a fool not to insure against fire, an infernal fool, but it can't be helped. It's ruined me." And he turned away and crossed the road to the house, which the constable had indicated as the one where old Mrs. Felmore had sought shelter. For half an hour Boyne sat listening while the old woman shouted to him excitedly her description of the fire. He adopted that mealy-mouthed attitude which he could assume at will. That attitude he adopted so cleverly when he went to church so regularly, and condoled with her. "Of course, Mrs. Felmore, all this horrible catastrophe shall not make any difference to you. I hear you had Miss Marigold to keep you company." "Quite right, but I'm so very sorry about it all. The poor girl must have been very frightened." "Where is she?" "She went back to Wimbledon Park about an hour ago, sir. She telegraphed to the bank, excusing herself for today, as she only had clothes that were lent her." "Ah, I'm so sorry about that. But have you any idea how it all happened?" Boyne asked the old woman. "No, sir, I haven't. I'm always so careful about fire," she answered. "I was burnt when I was a child, and therefore I always look at the kitchen grate and rake the cinders out before I goes to bed. But it seems to have been upstairs where the fire originated." "Yes, sir," replied the old woman. "I expect it was the kitchen flue. I asked old Mr. Morgan, the sweep, to do it 3 weeks ago, but he was very busy, and he didn't come. I've cleaned out the range all right, but that's what I think. I'm sorry, sir, but it wasn't my fault. Really, it wasn't." "Of course not, Mrs. Felmore. Morgan should have come when you ordered him," Boyne said. Afterwards, he succeeded in entering the gaunt, blackened wreck of his home. With satisfaction, he saw the frameless windows of the 2 upper floors, but inside a spectacle of utter ruin met his gaze. The water had come through the ceiling of his sitting room, half of which was down, the stairs consumed, and all the remaining furniture ruined beyond repair. From the cupboard, however, he took his pet, Nibby, who was still alive and probably wondering at all the commotion. "Poor little fellow," he exclaimed, stroking the rat's pointed pink nose and afterwards placing him in his pocket, as he did sometimes. "I shall give you to Mrs. Fellmore." And after a final look round at the scene of the wreckage, he returned to where his deaf old housekeeper was staying and presented her with the tame rat. Late that same afternoon, Boyne hurried along Theobald's Road, past the railings of Gray's Inn, and crossing the busy road with its procession of tramcars, turned the corner into Harpa Street, a short, dingy thoroughfare of smoke-grimed, old-fashioned houses, once the residences of well-to-do people, but now mostly let out in tenements. Before one of the houses on the left-hand side, he halted and pulled the bell. The door was opened by a young girl wearing a dirty apron and whose hair was in curlers. "Good afternoon, Mr. Bennett." "Yes, he's upstairs," she exclaimed. So up the uncarpeted stairs Boyne went to the top of the house. "It's only me," he said reassuringly as he turned the handle of a door and unceremoniously entered a small, barely furnished, ill-kept room. A cheap oil lamp, smoking badly, was burning on the table, while near it, back in the shadow, sat the figure of a man huddled up in a ragged old armchair. "You," he grunted. "You've been a long time. I couldn't get here before, Lionel. It was too dangerous. I had to see that all was clear before I'd enter this street. There's always a detective or 2 about here, and it wouldn't do for you to be seen outside." "No," grunted the man, who, rising slowly to his feet, came within the feeble zone of light which revealed a thin, bony face with high cheekbones, an abnormal forehead, and a pair of deep-set dark eyes. The faded gray suit he wore was several sizes too big for him, yet his arms seemed of unusual length, and his hands were narrow and long, with talon-like fingers. His countenance was truly a strange one, being triangular with very narrow chin and very broad brow, the face of a man who was either a genius or an idiot. "I waited all night for you," he said in plaintive tones. "And you never came." "Well, I'm not going to risk anything, even for you," replied Boyne roughly. "I've got quite enough of my own troubles just now." "Oh, what's happened?" "Lots. It's a good job I got you away from Hammersmith, my friend. The place is burned up." "Burned up?" echoed the strange-looking man. "Oh, then you've had the beautiful fire you used to talk about, eh? And has it all gone?" "The lot. And a darn good job for you." "And that beautiful microscope?" the man asked regretfully. "Has that gone too?" "Yes. The whole bag of tricks has been consumed. That's why I didn't come last night," Boyne said. "Oh, the beautiful Mike," exclaimed the abnormal creature, as though to himself. "And it cost such a lot. Oh, such a lot." "Don't trouble about the microscope, you fool," cried Boyne roughly. "Just try and pull yourself together and save your own skin. Where are those tubes? I want them." The lean man in the overlarge suit ambled across the room, his head bent forward, for he was very round-shouldered, and going to an old leather bag in the corner, slowly unlocked it and drew out a thick cartridge envelope, which contained something hard. Boyne took it from him quickly, and tearing it open, took out 2 dark blue tubes of glass, the corks of which were sealed with wax. "Are they all right?" he asked harshly. "Can you guarantee them? Now don't tell me a lie," he added threateningly, "or it will be the worse for you. I had a good mind to give you over to the police when you came to Pont Street the other night. You deserved it, venturing out like that. I got to know where you were, and I had to come and see you," whined the ugly creature as he ambled back to his chair. "Don't do it again. Remain in hiding. Keep close here. You are in comfortable quarters. Old Mrs. Sampson below is always silent as regards her lodgers. Lots of men who have had this room have hidden from the police till they found a way out of it. Take my advice and do the same. But don't attempt to come round to Pont Street, for we don't want you there, understand that?" And he put the little glass tubes, which contained fatal bacteria, back into their envelope and placed them carefully in his pocket. "But money. I must have money, cried the other, a young old man whose age it was impossible to determine though his hair was growing gray. Of course you must, laughed Boyne. Here's 50 pounds to go on with. And keep a still tongue, or it will be the worse for you. Recollect, if you are unfortunate enough to be arrested, it will only be because of your own idiotic movements. Keep quiet here. Misfortune may befall any of us, said the other in that peculiar whining voice which showed that his mental balance was not normal. True, but if you do happen to fall into the hands of the police, remember, breathe, not a word. Trust to me to help you out of the scrape. Trust Mrs. Sampson downstairs, and trust me. Yes, but oh, that beautiful mic. Burn up. That beautiful mic. Don't bother about that. I'll buy you another, and all the apparatus if you'll only keep a still tongue and remain in the house. I've told Mrs. Sampson not to let you out. Oh, I won't go out. I promise you I won't, he said with an idiotic stare. I only went upon street because I wanted to know if you were all right. And incidentally, you wanted money, laughed the other. Well, you had it. You have it again now. Remain quiet and content. I'm busy. I've got lots of things to look after. I've probably got to go away, but I'll see you have money to go on with all right. Very well, said the strange man. This place is better than Hammersmith. Living in a locked room for weeks and months, nobody to see, and only breathing the fresh air on the roof when everybody had gone to bed. But you had your work, your scientific work in bacteriology. You can't live without your work. Ah, yes, I had my work. But oh, it was so lonely, so very lonely. You're not lonely here, said Boyne cheerfully. So don't bother. Take your ease and make the best of it. You're in a house which shelters people like yourself. Here everyone keeps a still tongue, and nobody knows about little Maggie. The curious man with the triangular face blinked across at Boyne and remained silent for several moments. Little Maggie, he gasped at last. Little Maggie. Ah, I remember. Again he paused. Then glaring into Boyne's face with a strange, wild expression, he said, You? Why, you're really Willie Wisten. Of course I am, laughed Boyne. But keep cool, Lionel, old chap, or you'll have one of those nasty attacks of yours coming on again. Ta-ta, I'll come back very soon, he said, and turning he left the room and descended the stairs. Perhaps I'll come back, he muttered to himself. But I do not think so. The idiot has served me well, and I've got the tubes. That is all I want, at present. And a moment later, he was walking in the darkness through Harper Street. Chapter 26. Get rid of the girl. 10 days more had passed. Poor Mrs. Morrison had been buried at Brookwood, her sister and several relatives being among the mourners. Notice had been given through a solicitor to the insurance company of the assignment of the policy for £10,000 to Mrs. Brayborn. The solicitor, a perfectly respectable man practicing in the city, had received a call from Mrs. Brayborn upon Street, and she had handed him the policy and the assignment. Boyne had first made secret inquiries regarding the unsuspecting lawyer, and found him to be a man with a very high reputation in his profession. Hence the Red Widow and her 2 associates, having successfully defied the French ex-maid and her lover, were now awaiting payment by the insurance company. Boyne, on his part, had cleverly destroyed all traces of the secret of that upstairs room in which had lived for some time the half-demented, eccentric Lionel Gosden, who was so blindly obedient to every order of the criminal who held him in control. There only remains that girl, remarked Boyne as he sat with his wife one night. Yes, the sooner she's out of the way the better, my dear Bernie. She knows far too much. I've got the remainder of the stuff from Lionel. Then it'll be quite easy. I needn't tell you the way. Boyne smiled as he took another cigarette from his case. Yes, he said, and then I think that Ana and I will clear off abroad and leave you as the lone widow in whose favor dear Augusta insured her life. True, we ought to part as soon as possible. What do they think of your absence from Hammersmith? Oh, they know my home is burned up, but I put in an appearance now and then and collect up a few premiums just to show myself. I wonder what the girl told the police. Lilla remarked thoughtfully. Some story which they, no doubt, put down to be a cock-and-bull statement. About the locked room, most probably. She might have heard Lionel moving about or coughing before I got him away from there. If so, the noise would naturally excite her suspicion. What about the man Durant? Oh, we needn't trouble about him. It will be months before he can get back again. And when he does, he'll find none of us here, the girl dead, of natural causes, of course, and the house being rebuilt. We have nothing to fear from him, providing we can get rid of the girl. And that must be done at once, the handsome woman repeated. While she is alive, she will be a constant menace to us. Next morning, when he left Pond Street, he went to the city and, knowing that Marigold always went out at 1:45 to her lunch, he waited outside the bank. At last she came, a neatly dressed and dainty figure of the true type of business girl, and at the corner of Finchage Street he met her, as though by accident, and raised his hat. "Why, Mr. Boyne," she exclaimed in surprise. "Yes, this is an unexpected meeting, Miss Marigold. I haven't seen you since the fire," he said. "How lucky that you and your aunt escaped. I can't think how it was caused, except that your aunt perhaps dropped a match upstairs before going to bed." "No, Mr. Boyne," she said. "It's a mystery. I'm glad, however, that Auntie is recovering from a shock. Have you heard anything lately of Mr. What is his name? Durant, isn't it?" "Not a word. I can't think what has become of him. They've heard nothing at his office since his last telegram." "Oh, I shouldn't worry. He told you in his message not to worry, you know," he said cheerfully. Marigold distrusted the man, yet she remembered how she and Gerald had resolved, at all hazards, to penetrate the mystery surrounding him. She could not deny that he had always been polite and generous towards her, and her aunt would never have a more kind and considerate master. "Come and have some lunch with me," he suggested suddenly, as he glanced at his watch. "I'm just going to have mine, and I want to talk over your aunt's future, what she is to do while my house is being rebuilt." Marigold hesitated a few seconds. Then she replied, "I'm awfully sorry, Mr. Boyne, but my assistant is away ill, and we're most awfully busy in the bank today. I'm only out for 10 minutes this morning. I usually have half an hour. Then come somewhere and have dinner with me tonight." "I can't tonight. I'm going to the theater with a girlfriend." "Tomorrow night, then," he said. "I'll meet you at Piccadilly Tube Station, say at 7, and we'll dine somewhere." Again, Marigold hesitated. She was naturally distrustful, yet she argued within herself that perhaps if she accepted his invitation, she might learn from him something of interest. "No," he laughed merrily. "I'm sure you won't refuse me, Marigold. I want to see what I can do for your aunt because, well, perhaps I may not set up house again. And I don't want to leave her in the lurch. Poor, deaf, old soul." His solicitude for her aunt touched her, and so she promised to meet him, as he suggested. Then, 2 minutes later, he raised his hat, and they parted. As the girl sat with her glass of milk and sandwiches before her in the little tea shop, strange thoughts crowded through her mind. The refusal of the police to assist her to find Gerald had hipped her, and ever since the night of the fire she had gone about utterly disconsolate and broken-hearted. The fire was mysterious, coming within an hour or so of her visit to the police. Yes, the more she reflected, the stranger still appeared the whole enigma. She returned to the bank and sat hour after hour her books, but her only thought was of Gerald, the reason of his disappearance. Next day, just before noon, while she was busy at the bank, one of the male clerks came to her desk and said, "Miss Ramsay, you're wanted on the telephone." "Me," exclaimed Marigold, much surprised, for none of the staff were allowed to speak on the telephone except upon urgent family affairs. Was this one? She hurried to the telephone box and heard a female voice, which she recognized as that of Gerald's sister at Ealing. "You there, Marigold?" "Listen," she said. "I've just had a wire from Gerald. It's sent from Folkestone Harbor and says, 'Back again. Don't worry. With you soon, but not yet.' Marigold knows why. Have wired Gerald." "Oh, how lovely," cried the girl over the phone in wild delight. "I expect I've got a wire at Wimbledon. I'll tell you what he says. Such lots of thanks for ringing up. Goodbye. I'll come over and see you soon, dear." "Righto." And she hung up the receiver, her cheeks flushed with the excitement of the good news. Gerald, had spoken at last. Further adding of figures that day was out of the question. She could not work, but ever and anon, she raised her eyes to the big clock, the hands of which moved, oh, so slowly. At last 5 o'clock came, and she put her books away in the trolley ready to be wheeled to the strong room by the uniformed messenger, and putting on her hat, and coat hurried away home in the crowded tube. She missed her train, and things seemed to move too slow for her, but on arrival at the station, she raced home. Yes, in a narrow hall of the little suburban villa lay a telegram on the hat stand. She tore it open with frantic haste and read, "Do not make inquiry about me. Am quite safe and am in possession of some very important facts. Just returned from abroad. Be watchful, but do not feel anxious. Am quite all right. Love, Gerald." It reassured her. She dressed and went out to meet Mr. Boyne, carrying in her handbag the treasure message from Folkestone Pier, together with her powder puff, her little mirror, and a few hairpins. She had no idea, however, that at the moment when she was dressing to dine with her aunt's benefactor, a lady with red-brown hair, having taken tea at the Pavilion Hotel in Folkestone, was in a first-class carriage in a boat express for London, and that same lady had only arrived in Folkestone a couple of hours before, and on meeting the boat had handed in the message at the office at the harbor. She was at Piccadilly Tube Station quite early, and it was fully 10 minutes before Boyne put in an appearance, smiling and happy. "I'm so glad you've been able to come, Miss Marigold," he exclaimed as he shook hands with her warmly. "Now we'll just go and have a little dinner together and talk about your aunt." And he placed his hand upon her arm in a paternal manner and started across the road to Coventry Street. There's a little Italian place in Wardour Street where they do you excellently. A man I know told me of it the other day, and I dined there a couple of nights ago and found things very good. Not much of a place to look at, but good, well-cooked food. So let's go there. She walked with him, but unable to contain her joy at receiving that reassuring wire from Gerald. She said, as they walked along Coventry Street, "I've had a wire tonight from Mr. Durrant. He's all right." "Have you really? How excellent," exclaimed Boyne. "What does he say?" "He wires from Folkestone Pier. He's just arrived back in England, and he says he's all right. That's all. Well, what do you want more? Your boy is back, and no doubt you'll see him soon. I've always had in my mind that his absence has been due to some secret mission given to him by his employer. Those food people in Mincing Lane are profiteering out of all conscience, and Durrant's absence is only what might well be expected. He'll get a big bonus for carrying out some little bit of delicate diplomacy with regard to food supplies from abroad." They turned up Wardour Street and presently stopped in front of one of the small, unpretentious little foreign restaurants, where one can always rely upon good cooking, even though the quality of the food sometimes leaves a little to be desired. Not more than half a dozen people were in the white-enameled little place, but the proprietor, a well-dressed, prosperous-looking little Italian, came forward to greet them. "Table for two, oh. Yes. You reserved it, sir, I know. This way, please." And he conducted them to a cozy spot in a corner where a table was laid à deux. Marigold, flushed with excitement on account of the telegram in her bag, threw off her coat, settled her blouse, and sat down opposite the man, while an elderly waiter was quickly in attendance. "I've ordered dinner," said Boyne, rather impetuously. "Antonio will know." And he dismissed him. "I've told them to get a nice little dinner for us," he said, looking across at the girl. "Well now, Miss Marigold," he went on, "first, I'm delighted that you could come and have dinner with me tonight. Now that my house is no longer inhabitable, I live in rooms at Notting Hill Gate. But rooms are not like one's own home, and especially with your aunt as housekeeper. A more economical woman never lived. She'd save the eggshells and turn them into money, if she could." And they both laughed. "Yes, Auntie is very saving," replied the girl, whose sole purpose in accepting the unusual invitation was to try and draw her host, and so further the plans set by her lover. "Saving. What I always say is that she's the most perfect housekeeper anyone ever had. That's why I want to do something for her." "It's really very good of you, Mr. Boyne," said the girl. "I know now, keenly she has always looked after your interests. And I appreciate that, Miss Marigold. Now, my idea is to allow her £2 a week till I get settled again." "Very generous of you, I'm sure," replied Marigold. "With her infirmity, it's most difficult. Her deafness has increased the last 6 months, and she could never get another situation now. I'm sure of that." "Then you'll look after her if she has £2 a week regularly, "Yes, she can come and live with me at Wimbledon," the girl said. "I'm sure Andy will be very grateful," she added. Only a couple of days ago, she told me she was wondering what she would do now that the house is burnt, and she couldn't live with a neighbor forever. Boyne was silent for a few seconds. The waiter had placed the little plates of sardines, olives, and sliced beet upon the table, the usual hors d'oeuvres of the foreign restaurant. The girl's host looked her in the face suddenly and asked, "Tell me, Miss Marigold, what friends have you?" "Relatives, you mean?" "Well, practically none who count, except Auntie and my sister," she replied, little dreaming that the man had put that question with an ulterior motive, and a very sinister one, too. "And also Mr. Durrant," he laughed. Marigold blushed. "Don't fear. He'll soon be back with you, and no doubt explain matters." The girl made no reply. It was her own secret that his absence was due to the inquiries he was making concerning the past career of the plausible and hard-working man who was at that moment her host. The soup was served, a clear pot au feu, hot, and as the waiter turned away, Boyne drew a handkerchief from his trouser pocket, and next moment a number of coins fell upon the floor. Instantly Marigold drew her chair away from the table and bent down to see where they were. At that moment Bernard Boyne executed a clever trick which he had done before. He flicked into the girl's hot soup a piece of very soft gelatin that had been extracted only half an hour before from one of those mysterious blue glass tubes he had obtained from the idiot scientist hiding in Harper Street. The piece of gelatin fell into the soup unnoticed by the girl, whose eagerness was centered upon the picking up of the lost coins, and the other diners only glanced across for a second and did not notice the dropping of that fatal dose. "Don't bother," he said airily next moment. "The waiter will find it. They're really only coppers. I was foolish to put my handkerchief there. Please don't bother. Your soup will be cold." And, thus reassured, the girl drank her soup with her spoon and greatly enjoyed it, for it was excellent. Boyne watched her with complete satisfaction and confidence. The other courses were served, fillets of sole, and a chicken en casserole with mushrooms in true continental style. Then a cup in which were fruit, ice cream, and champagne, and black coffee afterwards. The dinner, Marigold agreed, was excellent. Boyne smoked cigarettes and chatted merrily the whole time, until at last he paid the bill and walked back with her. They shook hands, and she thanked him heartily. Then they parted, Boyne promising to see old Mrs. Fellmore and pay her the amount he suggested. As he strode along down the Haymarket, however, on his way back to Pont Street, he laughed aloud and muttered to himself, "I don't think we shall be troubled with you, young lady, after a few more days." Chapter 27. The day after Teomoro. 3 days passed. Marigold, on rising in the morning of the third day, felt hot and feverish. Her sister had suggested that she should telephone to the bank, excusing herself. "I think I've got a chill," Marigold remarked. "I felt rather queer yesterday." "Then stay at home, dear." "I can't," the girl declared as she put on her hat. "We're so awfully busy just now. Miss Meldrum and Miss Page are both away with influenza. I'm bound to go." So she went, but feeling very ill. At the bank, one or two of the girls remarked how unwell she looked, and as the morning wore on, the pains in her head became worse. She could eat no lunch, and at 2 o'clock she was compelled to return home to Wimbledon. She went straight to bed, but her friends troubled little, for it was evident that she was run down by the eternal anxiety over Gerald's absence, and that she had caught a severe cold. Next morning she seemed worse. Therefore her sister went for Dr. Thurlow, who lived in Kenilworth Avenue, but he was so busy that it was not possible for him to put in an appearance until nearly 7 o'clock that evening. He examined the girl, and though he could not diagnose the cause immediately, he at once recognized that she was decidedly ill. He prescribed a mixture, gave certain instructions, and promised to call early next morning. This he did, and found that her temperature had risen, and that she was much worse and a little delirious. In her delirium, she called constantly for Gerald in a pathetic, piteous voice. "Will my Gerald never come back to me?" she cried. "Will he never return?" "She is ill, very ill," declared the doctor gravely to her sister. "We shall have to be extremely careful of her." Marigold was coughing badly, for already a large area of her lungs had become involved and consolidated. Hence the doctor carried a portion of the sputum to his surgery, and that afternoon discovered the presence of the deadly streptococcus. On establishing the actual disease, he at once telephoned for some antipneumococcic serum, and this he injected into the patient early next morning. Having done so, he turned to her sister and said, "I'm extremely sorry to tell you that this is our last hope. She is, I fear, collapsing fast. The organism I have found is most deadly, and I think it only right to tell you that my personal opinion is that the disease has gone too far." "What, doctor?" gasped the young woman, pale and anxious. "Will she die?" "That I cannot say, but I never like to deceive my patient's friends in cases so critical as this. To me, she seems to be growing weaker. I will be back at noon." And the busy, white-headed doctor went out and drove away in his car. Now on that same morning, about 11 o'clock, a tall, gaunt, hollow-eyed young man in a shabby tweed suit and golf cap walked quickly up from the Empress Dock at Southampton and across Canute Road to the railway station, where he bought a third-class ticket for Waterloo. "Back in England at last," he muttered to himself as he entered an empty compartment. "I shall soon see Marigold again. Then we will get even with our enemies." The unshaven man was Gerald Durrant, changed indeed from the spruce young secretary of Mincing Lane. He looked 10 years older, for his face was pinched though bronzed, and the suit he wore was certainly never made for him. The truth was that the steamer Penturch of Sunderland ran into very bad weather in the Bay of Biscay, and during a great storm off the Morocco coast, Captain Bowden thought it wise to put in for shelter at the little port of Agadir. One night, just before the vessel weighed anchor to leave, Gerald dived into the sea and succeeded in swimming ashore. His absence was not noticed until 3 hours later, when the vessel was well out to sea, and Captain Bowden, having lost so much time, did not deem it worthwhile to bother about a man who was no doubt half a lunatic. Gerald, however, succeeded, with the aid of a friendly English trader, in getting by road from Agadir to Mogador, where he told his strange story to the British vice-consul, who in turn arranged a passage for him on a small steamer homeward bound, and gave him a little money, sufficient to pay his railway fare from Southampton to London. Truly, his had been an astounding adventure, and now he was eagerly looking forward to the happy reunion with the girl he loved so passionately. All his belongings were in the small brown paper parcel on the rack above him. At the station he had bought a packet of cigarettes, and as he smoked he gazed reflectively out of the carriage window. The train was an express, but in his mood it seemed to be the slowest in the world. What would Marigold think of his long absence? He had once or twice thought of telegraphing to her from Mogador, or from Brest, where they had touched, but he had deemed it best to return to her suddenly, and then wreak vengeance upon those who had so cleverly plotted to inveigle him to that flat on that never-to-be-forgotten night. Waterloo, the new station with its bustle and hurry. He sprang from the carriage and took the next train back to Wimbledon and then on to Wimbledon Park. At last he halted before the neat little villa with its white-painted balcony and knocked. Marigold's sister opened the door. "Good heavens," she gasped. "Mr. Durrant, is it really you?" "It is. I'm back again." "Where is Marigold?" "Come in," she said. "I hardly know what to say. Marigold is, she's not very well." And then in a few brief words as he stood in the narrow hall, she told him of his beloved's sudden illness. A second later he dashed upstairs, and then in silence, treading noiselessly, he advanced to the bedside of the delirious girl, who with flushed face was calling for her Gerald. Tenderly he placed his cool hand upon her brow. "But surely she will live," he cried in blank despair. "The doctor has grave doubts," her sister replied. "She had such deep and constant anxiety regarding your absence, Mr. Durrant, that her constitution has become undermined, and now she has caught this terrible chill which has developed into acute pneumonia." "But people get over pneumonia," he exclaimed. "Surely Marigold will recover. The doctor told me this morning that the malady is of the most virulent type. There are few recoveries." "Few recoveries," he echoed, while at the same time the poor girl was murmuring something incoherent regarding Gerald. "Yes. He said that if she got well again, it could be only by a miracle. The serum might do its work, but, well, Mr. Durrant, I must tell you what he really said. He told me that he regarded the case as hopeless. The crisis will be the day after tomorrow." "The day after tomorrow," he said. and she will not recognize me till then. All that the poor fellow had been through, the tortures and horrors of that bondage in which everyone believed him to be mentally irresponsible, were as nothing. He loved Marigold Ramsay with the whole strength of his gallant manhood. His soul was hers. They were soulmates, and yet she was slowly slipping away from him just at the moment of his return and his intended triumph. Her sister led him downstairs. In the modest, well-kept little dining room below, they had a further conversation. She was, of course, from time to time reassured by your telegrams. By them she knew that you were alive, and they renewed her hope that you would return. "Telegrams!" echoed the man, who looked more like an unkempt tramp than a businessman. "I sent no telegrams." "What do you mean, Mrs. Baynard?" "Why, the messages you sent. She has them all in her handbag, but I was unable to communicate with her. I was declared to be mad, and was sent upon a sea voyage for the benefit of my health. I now know that it was for the benefit of Bernard Boyne. I'll get her bag and show you." "Marigold has kept them all," her sister said, and she left the room for a few moments, returning with the dying girl's black silk vanity bag, for which she drew several telegrams carefully folded. These he opened and examined, standing aghast as he read them. "Why, I never sent a single one of them," he said. "They're all forgeries." "What?" cried Marigold's sister and Hetty in one breath, for her sister-in-law had entered the room and greeted the man who had returned. "I tell you I never sent any message to her," he said. "Somebody has done this." "Who? Who can it be?" asked Hetty. "I think I know," replied Gerald in a hard voice. "If I am not mistaken, my enemies have been revenged upon me." "Enemies? What enemies?" asked Marigold's sister. "Surely you have no enemies." "I'm sure Marigold hasn't." "Wait, and we shall discover the truth," said the young man. "Marigold must get well. I have certain questions to put to her. She can tell us much that is still mysterious concerning Mr. Boyne." Hetty looked him full in the face and said, "Jack, my husband, was over at Hammersmith 2 days ago. The place is all boarded up." "What place?" "Mr. Boyne's house in Bridge Place. There's been a fire there, and all the upper part has been burned out. Marigold was staying with her aunt that night, and they both escaped just in the nick of time." "Repeat that," he said, half-dazed. Hetty repeated what she had said. So the place has been burned up, has it? That's more than curious, isn't it?" "Why?" "Because of the mystery surrounding that man Boyne," he said. "Marigold, 10 days ago, said that she didn't believe that Mr. Boyne was as honest and sincere as people believed, but really, I have never taken any notice of her suspicions. We all of us suspect one of our friends. Marigold spoke the truth. I agree entirely with her. There are certain facts which I have established, which show that this man Boyne, most modest of men, is an adventurer of a new and very extraordinary type. He is engaged in some game that is very sly, and by which he somehow enriches himself by very considerable sums." Gerald Durrant, an hour later, went up to Waterloo and on to Hammersmith, where in the evening he stood before the boarded-up ruins of the fire. He saw that the top floor had been destroyed. "So the secret of that top room has been wiped out," he remarked to himself. "Why? Did Boyne suspect us of prying? If he did, then what more likely than he should put his slow, but far-reaching, fingers upon us both? That I should have been drugged and placed on board a ship bound for the other side of the world, and branded as a semi-lunatic, is only what one might expect of such a master brain. At a public house in King Street, a few doors from the end of Bridge Place, he got into conversation with the landlord, who told him of the events of that night when the house caught fire. It's an awful thing for poor old Boyne, he added. Although he is an insurance agent, it seems that, though he insured other people, he never insured himself. So he's ruined. So he told Mr. Dale, the corn dealer in Chiswick High Road, a week ago. Gerald smiled, but said nothing. His thoughts were upon the hooded recluse who lived on the top floor of that dingy house. What could have been the real secret of that obscure abode? A few other inquiries led him to the somber house with smoke-grimed curtains where deaf old Mrs. Fellmore had taken refuge, a few doors from the smoke-blackened, half-destroyed house. As he sat with the old woman, he spoke to her with difficulty, moving his lips slowly. "Yes," replied the old woman in her high-pitched voice, for all the deaf speak loudly. "It is all very curious, most curious. They've never found out how it caught fire. From Bridge Place, Gerald walked direct to the Hammersmith police station and, demanding to see someone in authority, was ushered upstairs to that same room into which Marigold had been shown, and there sat the same detective inspector, rosy-faced, quiet, and affable. He listened to the roughly clad young man's story, until presently he said, "Oh, you are Gerald Durrant, are you?" "Yes," was his visitor's astonished reply. "Why?" "Well, we had a young lady inquiring about you a little while ago. She said you were missing and asked us to make inquiry. But as you had wired to her several times, we considered that you had gone off on your own account." "Was Marigold here?" he asked, surprised. "Yes. She came one night and told us of her disappearance." "Where have you been?" "Abroad. I only returned today. That's why I told the young lady. You promised in your telegrams to come back. But I never sent any telegrams. They were all forged." The detective regarded him steadily and with an air of doubt. "Then why did you go away? What was your motive in frightening the poor girl?" he asked. "I went involuntarily. I suppose I must have been drugged and put on board ship at Hull." What ship?" Gerald gave the name of the ship and of its captain, which the detective scribbled down. "Yes. You'd better tell me the whole of your story. It seems rather a curious one." "It is," declared Durrant, and he proceeded to describe what happened on that fateful night when he met the two ladies in distress outside Kensington Gardens. The detective listened attentively, but noting Gerald's unkempt appearance and rough dress, together with his excited manner, he came to the conclusion that what he was relating was a mere exaggerated tale concocted with some ulterior motive, which to him was not apparent. At last, when Durrant began to describe Bernard Boyne's strange doings in Bridge Place, the inspector interrupted him. "The house has been burned, as I dare say you know." "Yes," replied Gerald vehemently. "Purposely burned for two reasons. First, to destroy evidence of whatever was contained in that upstairs room, together with its occupant." "Then you think someone lived up there?" "I feel absolutely sure of it." "You only believe it," said the officer. And after a pause he asked, "And what was the second motive?" "To get rid of Miss Ramsay. For that night, after visiting you, she went back and slept there in order to keep her aunt company." The detective smiled. Then, after a pause, he said, "Mr. Boyne is very well known and popular in Hammersmith, you know. Everyone has a good word for him. He is honest, hard-working, and often shows great kindness to poor people whose insurance policies would lapse if he did not help them over the stile. No, Mr. Durrant, Bernard Boyne is certainly not the daring and relentless criminal you are trying to make him out. Indeed, I hear that, by the fire at his house, he's lost nearly all he possessed. He wasn't insured. Why is it that by day he collects insurance premiums here, and yet at night puts on an evening suit and dines at the most expensive restaurants in the West End?" demanded Gerald, furious that his story was being dismissed by the police. He may have some motive. Many men who earn their money in a hard manner by day go into the West End at night dressed as gentlemen. He may have some motive. He may have some rich clients, for all we know." "I see you are dubious of the whole affair," exclaimed Gerald. "I've only come here to tell you what I know." "And I thank you for coming," replied the detective. "But we cannot act upon your mere suspicions. You must bring us something more tangible than that before we institute inquiries. I regret it," he added, "but we cannot help you. If you had any direct evidence of incendiarism, it would be different." And, thus dismissed, Gerald Durrant descended the stairs with heavy heart and hopeless foreboding, and walking out, made his way back to Wimbledon Park, where Marigold lay dying. Chapter 28. At the window. On that same afternoon, the Red Widow was seated with Boyne in Lilla's pretty drawing room in Pont Street. She had come there hurriedly in response to a telephone message from Boyne's wife, and they were now holding a council of war to decide upon their actions in future. "The only danger that can possibly threaten us is that infernal French girl and her lover," Boyne assured them, as he leaned back lazily in a silken easy chair and puffed at a cigarette. He was smartly dressed with a white slip in his waistcoat, fawn spats, and patent leather shoes. "At the present moment, they hold their tongues in the hope of squeezing more money from us. Meanwhile, we shall collect the sum assured upon dear Augusta and quietly leave England for a little while. A pity the sum is not larger," he added, I was only thinking the same the other day, said Aina. But how about that girl Ramsey? Oh, the end ought to be today, or at least tomorrow. I made secret inquiries in Wimbledon Park, and I hear that the doctor gave her up a day or so ago, he said grimly. That will be another distinct peril removed, remarked Lilla. It serves the girl right for being too inquisitive. And the man Durrant cannot be back yet, asked Aina. No, was Boyne's reply. I see by the papers that the ship has arrived at Cape Town. Even if he escaped there and found his way back, he could not arrive in London for another 3 weeks or more. So when he does return, if he ever does, he will find Marigold silent in her grave, that a disaster has occurred in Bridge Place, and that we are no longer in London. And Lionel, asked the Red Widow, oh, we have nothing to fear from him. He's only a gibbering idiot who believes my story that he committed a crime, killed a little girl named Maggie, although he was quite innocent. I made him wear a hood whenever he saw me, and I did the same. He believed me to be a man named Wisten, the witness of his crime, and because of that he executed in blind obedience every order I gave him. The fact that for months he never saw my face impressed him, and thus the terror of the police has so got upon his unstrung nerves that he is fast going from bad to worse. As a bacteriologist he is, of course, wonderful. He was marked out as a coming man by the professors at the laboratory at Oxford, before he took to drugs and his brain gave way. Where is he now? Asked Dana. Boyne explained the man's hiding place, adding, I've given him money to go on with. When that is finished, well, we will consider what we shall do. We shall want him again, no doubt, laughed Dana. Probably, said Boyne. But remember, if there are any awkward inquiries, as there may be if we can't settle completely with Celine, then we must be absent from London for a year or two. That's a pity, declared the Red Widow. Recollect what I said regarding that woman VC, whose hair is almost similar to mine. I met her at Brighton some time ago, and we became very chummy. She has a place in Gloucestershire, and that other woman Sampson. Both affairs would be so easy, 10,000 each. I know, my dear Aina, but let us square up this present deal first. That solicitor in the city is horribly slow. He is out of town till tomorrow. Time is going on. Each day brings us nearer open hostilities with Celine. Therefore, I suggest that Lilla should remain to receive the money and settle up while you and I get away. I propose going to Spain, and you, well, you know Sweden well. Why not slip over to Stockholm? We will all meet again, say, at Trouville in 6 weeks' time, and hold another consultation, suggested the man. Yes, Lilla said. That's all very well, but it means that I'm to be left alone to face Celine. Well, it's the only way, declared her husband. It is not wise for all of us to await the payment. I agree that the solicitor might easily have obtained a settlement of the claim ere this, especially as it is not disputed. But the more respectable the solicitor, the slower he is. Are you sure that the fire at Bridge Place has aroused no suspicion? Asked Dana. After a fire, there's always an inquiry as to how it originated. Yes, when the place is insured. But mine was not. Intentionally, Boyne replied with a grin. We couldn't afford that upstairs laboratory to be discovered. Besides, there was enough stuff in the tubes to kill a whole town. All sorts of infectious diseases from anthrax to bubonic plague. Lionel dabbled with them and gleefully cultivated them with his broth and his trays and tubes of gelatin. Well, as long as you are quite certain we are not watched, I don't care, said the handsome woman, who was so often seen at table at the Ritz, the Carlton, and the Berkeley. If we were, it would be most dangerous to meet, even as we are doing now. Bah, you are both growing very nervy, laughed Boyne derisively. It is so foolish. Nothing serious can happen. Even when the French girl grows greedy, we can always settle with her. Between us, we have laid up a nice little nest egg for the future. I reckoned it out yesterday. The game is one of the few which is worth a candle. And the people in their graves are better off, laughed Lilla, who was utterly heartless and unscrupulous. Boyne rose and obtained a fresh cigarette, while his wife rang the bell for tea. The latter was brought in upon a fine old Sheffield plate tray, and Lilla poured it out. When the manservant had gone, the Red Widow, turning to Boyne's wife, said, I really think, Lilla, after what Bernie has suggested, Then I shall plead illness and get away. I shall tell my friends I am going to Sicily, but instead I shall run over to Stockholm. I know lots of friends there. Indeed, we might carry on our affairs there later. The Scandinavian is a good insurance company. English companies are better, Boyne declared. I have little faith in foreign insurance companies. They always want to know just a little too much to suit our purpose. I've studied them all. My first case was in Milan 8 years ago, and it nearly ended in disaster. I had to clear out suddenly and leave my claim, which has never been paid. And I wasn't clumsy, I assure you. I got the stuff from old grandfather of Frankfurt. Oh, grandfather. I've heard his name before, said Anna. He sells tubes, doesn't he? Sells them. Of course he did, and still does. You have to be well introduced, and he charges you very high, but his stuff is first class, quite as good as Lionel's. Grandfather I met once in the Adlon, in Berlin, a funny old professor with long hair. But by Jove, he must have made a big fortune by this time. He charged £100 for a single tube of anthrax, sleeping sickness, or virulent pneumonia, and double for a certain poison which creates all the post-mortem symptoms of heart disease and cannot be detected. Well now, asked Lilla, sipping her tea from the pretty crown derby cup. What are we to do? As Bernie suggests, I think, said Anna. I'll get away, and next day Bernie can go to Paris, and on by the Sud Express to Madrid. Then on to Barcelona, said Boyne. I'm known there as Mr. Bennett. I've stayed once or twice at the Hotel Cologne. No, I really can't be left alone, said Lilla. As soon as you have gone, that girl Celine will call. Don't see her, dear, urged the Red Widow. Oh, that's all very well, but I can't be out each time she comes. I should be compelled to see her, and no doubt she would have the man with her. Then, when she found out that you had both gone, she would turn upon me. No, no, laughed Boyne. You will have money ready to give her, if she turns very hostile, so as to afford us further time. Their only game is blackmail. They suspect something concerning the old man at Chiswick, thanks to talking too loud in the presence of one's servants. It ought to be a lesson to us all. It is, Bernie, said the Red Widow, rising from her chair and crossing the room to get her handbag which she had left on the sofa by the window. As she took it up, she chanced to glance out into the street. My God, she gasped, and next second she sprang from the window. Her face was white as paper. My God, she repeated, reeling and steadying herself by the back of a chair. What's happened? Asked Boyne, springing up. No, no, for heaven's sake, don't go near the window. He has seen me. I'm sure he recognized me. Who? Emery, that solicitor in Manchester. He knows me as Augusta Morrison, the dead woman. And did he see you? Cried Boyne in a low, hoarse voice. Are you certain? Well, no, I'm not absolutely certain. He was looking up at the house, and he's coming here. At that second the front door electric bell rang. All three started. Why is he here? Asked Lilla. Are inquiries already on foot? If they are, then our game is up, declared Anna. You must receive him, Lilla, but you must deny all knowledge of me. You know nothing of Augusta Morrison. But he may call at Upper Brook Street, said Boyne quickly. You must not return there. Did he recognize me? That's the question, asked Anna, still pale to the lips. A second later the man entered with a card upon his salver, the card of the Manchester solicitor, Mr. Emery. Oh, exclaimed Lilla, taking it up. Oh yes, show him up. Then as soon as the man had left, Anna slipped upstairs into one of the bedrooms to hide, in company with Bernard Boyne. When a young Manchester solicitor was ushered in, he found the tea things cleared, which had been effected several minutes before, and Lilla rose to greet him. I believe you are Mrs. Brayborn, he said, bowing. My name is Emery. I am the solicitor who effected a policy on the life of the late Mrs. Augusta Morrison in your favor. My client, I hear with much regret, has died, and I understand from the company that you have put in your claim. Mrs. Brayborn admitted that it was so and offered her visitor a seat. I came this morning from Manchester in order to consult with your solicitor, he went on. Mrs. Morrison was a personal friend of mine, and she told me that she had, since her husband's death, discovered that she was indebted to Mr. Brayborn, hence her insurance on the assignment of the policy. It came as a great surprise to me, said Lilla, with her innate cleverness. I had not the pleasure of knowing Mrs. Morrison, though I met her husband several times years ago. My late husband was a friend of his, so she told me when we were together at Llandudno. Emery said, "It was certainly very generous of her to try and make reparation for some wrong which her husband did to Mr. Brayborn. But I confess I am somewhat surprised." "At what?" asked the pseudo-widow. "Well, she gave me the impression that you were a person of limited means. But that does not appear so," he said, glancing around the luxurious little apartment. Lilla smiled quite calmly. She was uncertain whether her very unwelcome visitor had recognized Aina through the window as his client, the false Augusta Morrison. "Of course, I have no idea what Mrs. Morrison told you concerning myself. I only know that my late husband was interested in certain business transactions with Mr. Morrison up in Scotland," she said, with an air of ignorance. "True, Mrs. Brayborn. But how is it that you have instructed your solicitors here to press a claim of which you now declare you had no knowledge?" For a second Lilla was cornered, but her quick woman's wit came to her aid, and smiling quite calmly, she said, "Well, to tell you the truth, a solicitor of Mrs. Morrison in London wrote me quite recently, explaining in strict confidence the position and the efforts your client had made to make reparation for her husband's swindling. All I know is that Mr. Morrison's business morality left a great deal to be desired, and we came very near ruin. Indeed, we should have been ruined had it not been for assistance I received from my father." "In what way?" asked the keen young lawyer. "Well, I think I need not go into such details," said the clever woman with whom he was confronted. "Your client, no doubt, admitted to you her husband's double-dealing and how he very nearly ruined us. It was because of that Mrs. Morrison of Carsfarren insured her life in my favor." Young Mr. Emery nodded, but his lips curled in a smile of incredulity. He paused for several moments, his gaze fixed upon the woman. "Well," he said at last, "I have been at the head office of the company today, after I found that your legal advisor was absent, and, well, to tell you the truth, they are not altogether satisfied." "Who?" asked Lilla in surprise. "The insurance company." "Why?" Again Mr. Emery paused. Again he fixed his eyes upon the woman before him. He slowly rose from his chair and walked to the fireplace, whereupon he drew himself up. Placing his hands in his trousers pockets, he said, in a changed voice, "Mrs. Brayborn, just because I have interested myself, rather unduly perhaps, in the affairs of my late client, Mrs. Morrison, I find myself confronted by several problems. I want you to assist me to solve at least one of them." "And what is that?" asked Lilla quite calmly. "Simply this," he said, fixing his dark eyes upon her. "I want you to explain the fact why, as I came along the street, I should see, standing here in your window, my late client, Mrs. Augusta Morrison." Chapter 29. On Thin Ice. Lilla drew herself up and looked her unwelcome interrogator full in the face with unwavering gaze. "Mrs. Morrison?" she echoed. "What do you mean?" "I mean, madam, that as I approached this house, Mrs. Morrison was looking out of the window." Lilla laughed. Though greatly perturbed, she had been forewarned and preserved an outward calm. "Really, Mr. Emery," she laughed, "you must be mistaken. I have not the pleasure of knowing Mrs. Morrison. I only knew her husband, who came to see us several times when we lived in Kensington. His wife lived in Scotland, but I was never acquainted with her." "Do you mean to insist that you have never seen her?" "Never in my life, to my knowledge," was the frank reply. "But I insist that my eyes have not deceived me, and that she was in your window a few minutes ago." Again Lilla laughed. "Well, Mr. Emery, though you and I have never met before, I can't help thinking that you are, well, just a little eccentric," she said. "You come here and declare that you have seen at my window a woman who is dead." "Ah, but is she really dead, Mrs. Brayborn?" asked the shrewd young man, who had of late been getting together an extensive legal practice in Manchester. "My dear Mr. Emery, ask yourself," Lilla replied. "I understand that the poor lady's sister was present at the end and took a last look at her before the coffin was screwed down. Surely her sister would know her? I am, of course, in utter ignorance of the facts, but I think before you make such foolish mistakes as you are doing, you had better inquire, don't you?" Her argument was rather disconcerting. Charles Emery felt certain that he had seen the face of the dead woman at the window. Yet, if it were true that her sister had seen her in her coffin, then surely his eyes had deceived him. Upstairs, Boyne and Aina stood together in breathless wonder at what was in progress below. Boyne knew how clever his wife was, and how, when faced with difficulties, she always became so calm and innocent. Of that he had had proof many times. Their marital relations had been such that he had long ago felt she was a superwoman in the art of deception. But here she was faced with a perilous problem, and both Aina and he knew it. They stood together, conversing in whispers. "Trust Lilla," said Boyne in a low voice. "She will wriggle out of anything. Besides, she had the tip that the fellow may have recognized you." Below, the young solicitor and Lilla were still in open hostility. Emery had grown angry. The woman had accused him of an undue suspicion. "Lots of people, especially those who are spooky, believe in a sixth sense," she said. "Surely you don't believe in it, do you, Mr. Emery?" "I do not." "Do you really insist that in my window you have seen the face of a woman who is dead and buried? If so, well, you've got the sixth sense, and it would be more profitable to you to go into the other world combined, which I believe is being formed, than a practice law. Personally, I only wish I had a sixth sense. Oh, well, a lot concerning other people's affairs I should know." And she laughed lightly, as though highly amused. Emery stood in silence. She could see that he was still unconvinced. The situation was one of the most perilous they had ever faced. "To tell you the truth, Mrs. Brayborn, I'm not at all satisfied," said the young man frankly. "I feel confident that the woman's face I saw at your window was that of Mrs. Augusta Morrison." "How utterly ridiculous," declared the clever adventuress. "If Mrs. Morrison's sister and other relatives saw her at the nursing home before and after her death, they must have recognized her. How, therefore, can a lady possibly be alive? It's silly to imagine such a thing." "Well," he asked, "who first informed you that the late Mrs. Morrison had assigned her life policy to you?" "A man I know named May, who was a friend of my husband and of the late Mr. Morrison." "And how did he know, pray?" "How can I tell? He knew Mrs. Morrison, I believe, and he used to stay at her house parties at Carstfairn. Possibly she might have told him." "When did you see him?" "I haven't seen him lately," she replied quickly, a fiction ready to her lips. "He rang me up about 3 days after Mrs. Morrison's death and told me of the sad event, of which I, of course, was in complete ignorance. Then he told me that she had insured her life for my benefit. I asked him how he knew that, but he only laughed and said that he knew and would send me particulars of the assignment of the policy and that I had better take steps at once to establish my claim, which naturally I did after receiving a few notes of the assignment. I made out a full account of my late husband's dealings with Mr. Morrison, how he had very nearly brought us to ruin, and placed them with the notes of the assignment in the hands of my solicitor, who, I suppose, in due course approached the insurance company. Previously, however, I had heard of the fact from another source, a solicitor, as I have already told you." Emery grunted. Then, after a pause, he asked, "Do you happen to know a certain lady living in Upper Brook Street, named Mrs. Pollen?" "Pollen? Pollen?" repeated Lilla. "The name sounds familiar. She's a society hostess, a woman who often has her photograph in the picture papers, isn't she?" she asked, with well-affected ignorance. "I think not. I've never seen her portrait in the papers. She was, however, a friend of Mrs. Morrison. I'm afraid I know nothing of Mrs. Morrison's friends. My husband knew some of them, of course, and I have to thank Morrison for bringing ruin to us. He made huge profits over these business deals and bought Carstfairn, while my husband went under and would have been down and out had it not been for my family, who assisted him on his legs again. Well, in any case, you seem to live in very easy circumstances today, Mrs. Brayborn," he remarked, glancing around the luxurious room. "Oh, I don't know," Lilla laughed lightly. "In London, we put all the goods in the window. You don't up in Lancashire." An awkward pause ensued. "Well, Mrs. Brayborn," he said at last, "I cannot conceal from myself that there are certain peculiar circumstances which must be cleared up." "About what?" she asked in pretended innocence. "About this curious claim of yours. The assignment of the policy was, of course, in my hands, and it is not at all clear how your mythical friend, Mr. May, gained knowledge of what the late Mrs. Morrison desired to keep secret. As I've told you, Mr. May gave me particulars regarding it, which I duly handed to my solicitors. If Mrs. Morrison, in a fit of remorse for her husband's sharp practice, as it seems, chose to insure her life for my benefit, I don't see, Mr. Emery, why you should raise any objection, she protested. She was your client, I presume? She was, he replied. And because I also acted as agent of the insurance company, I now consider it my duty to put all the facts before them, together with my allegation that the dead woman is actually in this house, or was when I entered here. Really, you are most insulting, declared Lilla with well-feigned indignation. I think it gross impertinence and a breach of professional etiquette that you should come here to see me and accuse me of lying when the matter is in the hands of my solicitor. Ah, Mrs. Brayborn, pardon me, please. I only wish to straighten things out, he said blandly. At present they are a little too tangled to suit me, he went on. When I have given over the facts to the company, my responsibility is at an end. Your solicitor returns to London tomorrow, and I will have a consultation with a view to a settlement. In some way or other, he added in a meaning tone. Then he bowed coldly and took his departure. The instant he had left, the trio of dealers in secret death held a hurried and excited council. The game is up, declared Aina, her countenance blanched to the lips. The fates are against us. How dare we press our claim further? And if we do not, then our failure to do so is self-condemnation. He's a shrewd young chap. He certainly recognized you. Curse it, cried Boyne. We must get away, said Lilla. We all of us have old Jackie James's passports, and it only remains for us to clear out at once. Old Jackie's passports, to which she had referred, were those cleverly fabricated since the war by an old man named James who lived at Notting Hill Gate, and who had at one time been a notorious forger. He now made a very excellent living by supplying crooks and criminals of all classes with false passports in neat little blue books, on which then photograph was fixed, and he himself embossed it with the stamp bearing the British Royal Arms and the words Foreign Office, as well as the rubber date stamp, at an inclusive cost of £15 each. These passports were beautifully printed in Bilbao, in Spain, together with the British red sixpenny stamp, but completed ready for the purchaser at Notting Hill Gate. Though I never like leaving good money behind, said Boyne, I must admit that our luck is quite out this time, and we must all lie doggo for a bit. Aina must not return to Upper Brook Street, for Emery is certain to go there, Lilla said. Curse the fellow, cried the Red Widow. It's all my fault. I ought to have exercised more care, but Bernie has always been so cocksure that everything was plain sailing. No, he protested. Surely I can't be accused of your indiscretions, Aina. I've done my best, just as we all have done, but we've fortunately received warning in time that the game is at an end, at least for a little while. We can resume it in France, or probably in America later on. All that remains now is for us to swiftly and quietly fade out and leave them all guessing. One good feature is that the girl Ramsay will not be able to tell them anything, said Lilla. I've always doubted her from the first. She's a cunning little cat. Yes, the end ought to be today, or tomorrow at latest, Boyne said, and by that time we shall all three be well on our way abroad. Then they began to discuss ways and means, the destination of each of them, and the matter of money, there being 3 deposits in different London banks in different names. The Red Widow and her companions had long ago taken every ingenious precaution in case of enforced flight at a moment's notice. There were, indeed, 3 separate sets of baggage lying at the waiting room of Victoria Station, but the banks were closed and no money could be obtained. In the meantime, the young Manchester solicitor, much puzzled of course, had taken a taxi and alighted in Upper Brook Street. Of the hall porter, he made inquiry regarding Mrs. Pollen, and was taken up in the lift. At the door of the flat he rang, and a smart maid answered. I want to see Mrs. Pollen, he said with his best smile. Mrs. Pollen isn't at home, sir, the girl replied. Dear me, he said, deeply disappointed. I've come up from the country specially to see her. When will she be back? I don't know. Perhaps not till the evening, sir. Emery paused. He was arriving at an estimate of the maid's loyalty to her mistress. "Well," he said, "my business is most important upon money matters. May I come in and write her a note?" "Madam has forbidden me to allow anyone inside during her absence," replied the good-looking, dark-eyed girl. "Of course, she fears thieves. But I'm a solicitor," and he showed her his card. "Please don't think I'm a thief." And he laughed merrily. The girl looked at the card and then allowed him in, showing him into the dining room, upon the table of which was a great bowl of La France roses, the room in which his client, Mrs. Augusta Morrison, had been entrapped and done to death so insidiously. "There's paper there, I think, sir," she said, indicating a small writing table set near the window. He seated himself, though his quick eyes took in all the surroundings. Before he began to write, he saw in a broad silver frame before him a large photograph of his client, Mrs. Morrison. "That's a beautiful portrait," he remarked to the girl. "Yes, sir. Mistress had it done about 3 months ago. It's very good of her." Charles Emery bit his lip and managed to stifle the ejaculation which rose to his lips. The truth was out. It was Aina Pollen whom he had seen at Mrs. Brayborn's window, and Aina Pollen had, he saw, posed for insurance purposes as Mrs. Augusta Morrison, the rich widow of Carlsfern. For a moment the discovery dumbfounded him. He scribbled a few lines. Then he tore them up, and, making excuse for troubling the maid, he rose and said he would call next day. Then he pressed into her hand a 10-shilling note. But just before he took his leave, he turned to her in the hall and asked suddenly, "Oh, by the way, has Mrs. Morrison been here to visit your mistress lately?" "Not lately, sir," she answered. "Poor lady, she's dead, so I hear. Did she often visit your mistress?" "Yes, sir. The last time she was here was at a dinner party with Mr. and Mrs. Brayborn." "Oh, then Mrs. Brayborn is a friend of your mistress, is she?" "I know her quite well. She lives in Pont Street." "Yes, sir. She's a very great friend," was the girl's reply. "So is Mr. Brayborn." "And who is Mr. Brayborn?" "Why, Mrs. Brayborn's husband, of course." As Emery descended the stairs to the street, he wondered who could be Mr. Brayborn, if Mrs. Brayborn was a widow, as alleged. At the end of the street, he hailed a taxi and returned at once to the head office of the insurance company, where he revealed certain other suspicions which had arisen in his mind after his interview with Mrs. Brayborn. Chapter 30. Through the darkness. Events happened apace. The criminal dovecot in Pont Street was now seriously disturbed. Even Boyne, usually so calm and unruffled in face of any peril or difficulty, saw that matters had grown very serious. He was in complete ignorance of the return of Gerald Durrant, nor did he know that at Wimbledon Park the doctor, on calling again late that afternoon, had pronounced that the serum was doing its work and that Marigold was decidedly better. It had been just a toss-up. According to his judgment, the serum injected to fight the germs of disease had been administered a few hours too late. The human machine is, however, a curious thing, and the throw of the dice with death is always weighted upon the side of the living. Gerald, pale, anxious, and emaciated after all the hardships he had gone through, sat by the bedside of his well-beloved, watching her eagerly. To his delight, she was slowly recovering. It is one of the features of the malady from which Marigold was suffering, thanks to the brutal plot to kill her, that after a certain fixed period, death supervenes or recovery comes very quickly. In her case, the doctor himself was agreeably surprised. She was recovering. He had said she would yet live to cheat her enemies. Gerald, realizing this, was in the seventh heaven of delight. He was, of course, in ignorance of what had transpired at Pont Street, or of the suspicion of Charles Emery, the man who had made the actual assignment of Mrs. Morrison's insurance. On the following morning, after hearing the doctor's good news, he sat beside Marigold's bed, and by slow degrees the girl recognized her lover as he bent over her and tenderly kissed her upon the brow. The light of recognition suddenly shone in her eyes, and smiling, she gripped his hand. "Yes, darling, I am home again," he said in a soft voice. "Home, to find that you're getting better. You've been very ill, but you'll soon be well again, thank God." For some moments the girl was too overcome by emotion to speak, but at last her lips moved, and in a voice scarcely audible, she pronounced his name. "Gerald," she articulated with difficulty, raising her hand until it rested against his cheek. "Gerald, my Gerald." "Yes, darling, I am here with you," he assured her soothingly, for they were alone together, the doctor having just left. "You have been very, very ill." "Yes," she whispered, "very ill." Then she closed her eyes for fully 5 minutes, as though the strain of speaking had been too much for her, while he sat at her bedside watching breathlessly the white countenance of the girl who was all in all to him. At last she again opened her eyes, and in a voice scarce above a whisper, asked, "Where have you been all this long time?" "Abroad, dear. But don't worry about that. I'm back," he said cheerfully. "Back with you. Rest, and you will soon be quite well again." Again she closed her eyes and turned her head slightly upon the pillow. And as she did this, Gerald again kissed her upon the brow. About 2 hours later her condition showed a marked improvement, but Gerald had not left her side for a moment. At noon she seemed so much better that he decided to go over to Ealing and obtain a suit of his own clothes, so as to make himself more presentable. This he did. His sister was naturally delighted to see him, but save for a brief explanation of his absence, he did not enter into any details concerning it. His anxiety was to return to Wimbledon Park. He had at first contemplated going to Mincing Lane to explain his absence, but had now decided to postpone that until the morrow. So about 3 o'clock he was back again at Marigold's bedside, delighted to find the great improvement which had taken place during the past few hours. The serum was doing its work, and slowly she was returning to her old self again. When they were alone, and Gerald was once more seated beside her, she turned to him, and in a low, intense voice asked if her sister had told him of the fire in Bridge Place. "Yes, dearest," he answered. "I know all about it. I've seen the ruin, and I've talked to your aunt. You both had narrow escapes. Mr. Boyne set it on fire, Gerald," she said weakly, "so as to get rid of what was in that upstairs room." "Without a doubt. I try to learn more about it. That's why I dined with Mr. Boyne." "You dined with him?" echoed her lover. "Yes, in order to try and learn something more. Did we not agree to keep a watchful eye upon him?" "We did, but I fell into a cunningly devised trap on the night I disappeared," he said. "I will describe it to you later." "Well, when you dined with the fellow, did you discover why he spends his evenings among those smart people in the West End?" "No, Gerald, but I came to the conclusion that he is a very remarkable crook." "Of that I'm certain, dear. We've both had proof of it. He knew we were watching him, and his intention, no doubt, was to get rid of both of us." "Yes, I quite agree," replied the girl faintly, yet smiling into his face. Then she added, "Do you know, Gerald, that ever since I dined with Mr. Boyne I haven't been the same. I felt ill next morning, and gradually the illness increased until I had to go to bed, and the doctor came to see me." Gerald Durrant knit his brows. "By gad," he gasped. I never thought of that. He invited you to dinner." In reply to his question, Marigold described the chance meeting near the bank and the invitation that followed. "Ah," he exclaimed after a pause. "He had got rid of me, and intended that you should die. Truly a most diabolical plot. I see it all, but we will be even with him yet, darling. Never fear." Assuring the girl that he would return very soon, Gerald Durrant left the house determined to take direct action. His failure to convince the police at Hammersmith that Busy Boyne, the pious insurance agent, was a master criminal had irritated and angered him. Probably if he went direct to Scotland Yard and retold the story, laying stress upon the plots against Marigold and himself, they would hear him and make some investigation. The mystery of that upstairs room and its weird occupant was ever uppermost in his mind. And now that it was destroyed, it made it plainer than ever that there had been some guilty secret hidden there. He went to Charing Cross and presently entered the headquarters of the Criminal Investigation Department at Scotland Yard, where he was courteously received by Detective Inspector Shaw in one of the cold, bare, official waiting rooms. The inspector, a short, stout, brusque man, listened very patiently to the strange story related to him, and once or twice jotted down notes. But his countenance was imperturbable, and Gerald's heart had already sunk within him, for he saw that he was quite unimpressed. At last Shaw stirred himself and said, Well, Mr. Durant, all that you've just told me is extremely interesting. Will you wait a few moments?" And rising, he left the room. On his return 5 minutes later, he asked Gerald to accompany him. They went together down a long corridor, where the young man was ushered into a comfortable office. A well-dressed man of rather dapper appearance was seated at a table, and Gerald was invited to a chair when he was closely questioned, more especially regarding his observations and those of Marigold upon the houses in Pont Street and Upper Brook Street, and also concerning the trap into which he himself had fallen and Marigold's inexplicable illness. "Is the young lady yet fit to see anyone, do you think?" asked the superintendent. "Is she well enough to make a statement?" "Not today, I fear. Perhaps she will be tomorrow." His interrogator reflected for a few moments. "When is that appointment due with Mr. MacDonald and the Frenchman? Gaultier is his name, isn't it?" he asked his secretary, who was seated at a table on the opposite side of the room. "They are due here now," was the latter's reply as he glanced at the clock. "Mr. Emery is also to be here, is he not, Mr. Francis?" "Yes, sir," replied the secretary. 5 minutes later there assembled in that room 5 other persons. Charles Emery was shown in with the inquisitive little man, Alexander MacDonald, who had arrived in Ardluey and, giving his name as John Gregg, had watched the Red Widow by orders from the detective office in Glasgow, and had gone back down Loch Lomond only half convinced that he was on the wrong track, and that she was not the notorious woman, Sarah Slade, for whom he was in search. Alexander MacDonald was, however, a very shrewd person, and when the first suspicion of a new case was aroused against Anna Paulin, as she now called herself, he saw that he had been sadly misled. Therefore, unknown to Scotland Yard, the Glasgow police had been doing underground work in order to fix the identity of the lady of Upper Brook Street. Almost simultaneously with the arrival of the 2 men, there came Celine and Gaultier, together with a well-dressed elderly man, the manager of the insurance company in which the false Mrs. Morrison had taken out a policy. For a full hour they sat with the superintendent of the Criminal Investigation Department, who, with a shorthand writer at his elbow, heard the further statement of each in turn. At last, turning to Inspector Shaw, he said, "There is certainly sufficient evidence to justify the immediate arrest of the 2 women and the man Boyne. We must get the statements of Miss Ramsay and her aunt later." Then, taking a sheet of pale yellow official paper, he scribbled 1 or 2 lines, signed them, and handed it to Shaw. "I think that is all we can do at the moment," he said, addressing the party. "It is quite evident that a great insurance conspiracy has been attempted, and not for the first time. Apparently the late Mr. Martin was a victim, together with other persons, whose names and circumstances we shall later on discover. To me it seems that great credit is due to the intelligence of Miss Ramsay and of Mr. Durant, who watched the man Boyne so ingeniously until they must have somehow betrayed themselves, and thus have placed their lives in jeopardy. I think," said the Manchester solicitor, "that if Mrs. Brayborn had pretended to remain in ignorance for a month or so, and not sought to establish her claim, the company would have, no doubt, paid the sum without question." "Yes," laughed the superintendent, "but criminals always betray themselves by overdue anxiety. But we have here to deal with a very dangerous gang, and it only shows to the insurance world how easily they may be defrauded by a well-established organization." Shaw had left the room, and already the telephone was at work to ensure the arrest of the criminals. It will certainly be highly interesting to discover how many innocent people have actually been the victims of this desperate and relentless trio who dealt secret death in order to enrich themselves, remarked the superintendent. "There was a grave suspicion of the woman Paulin in another case about 2 years ago," said MacDonald. "Therefore, on a report from Ardluey, I ran up from Glasgow, but I failed to identify her as the woman who had called herself Slade, though I had very strong suspicions. Her social standing deceived me, I admit." "Poor Mrs. Morrison of Carsfairn," exclaimed MacDonald in his strong Glasgow accent. "She was a good lady, a very good lady." "Well," said the superintendent, rising from his chair, "we have to thank you all for your combined efforts, and especially Mademoiselle and Mr. Durant. Let's hope we shall get the guilty ones, and then we shall all meet again as witnesses at the Old Bailey." And thus, just after 5 o'clock, he dismissed them, Gerald, excitedly and with all haste, making his way back to the bedside of his loved one in order to tell her the intentions of the police. At last, the devilish crimes of the Red Widow and her accomplices were to be exposed, and the trio of death dealers punished. Conclusion. Scotland Yard is difficult to arouse, but when once actual evidence of crime is forthcoming, it is quick of action. At 5:30 that afternoon, a small, undersized man, who wore the uniform of the Metropolitan Water Board, rang at the basement entrance of the house in Pont Street, and the cook opened the door. "Well, Mrs.," he exclaimed merrily, "what's the trouble with the water here? Trouble?" "There's no trouble," replied the cook, who never suspected that 4 other men were in close vicinity awaiting their leader's call. "Oh, but we've had a report that you've got a bad leak in one of your pipes. So I'll just have to look at it." And he carried in what looked like a walking stick in wood with a wide trumpet end. The cook took him into the scullery, and he placed the end of his stick upon the pipe. He listened intently, using it like a huge stethoscope. Then he went from pipe to pipe, chatting merrily with the cook and the man's servant all the time. "Are your people at home?" he asked the cook. "No. They went away an hour ago in a car down to Brighton for 3 weeks. So we're all off for a bit of holiday. So hurry up. Do you find anything wrong, mister?" "No," replied the shrewd little man. "There must be some mistake, I suppose. There's no leak here, as far as I can detect. But what a time you will have, eh? Do they take much luggage?" "No, not very much. Madam said she would come up and get some more on Tuesday." "When sudden like it?" "Yes, all of a hurry. Their friend, Mrs. Pollen, slept here last night, which is a bit unusual. But my mistress had a phone message. Then they rang up for a car, and all 3 went off. They left their address, the Metropole. Do you know where they got the car from?" "No, that I don't." "Why, I heard Mrs. Pollen ordering it on the phone. But where it came from, I don't know." "You think that they're at the Metropole at Brighton?" "Of course they are. But are you going down there to report a leak of water, mister? If so, yours must be a nice, comfortable job." The little man laughed mysteriously, and leaving, walked to the corner of Pont Street, where he reported to his colleagues that the birds had flown. Inquiry at Upper Brook Street brought no better result. Mrs. Pollen had not been seen there since the previous day. Already news of the flight had been telephoned to Scotland Yard, who, in turn, telephoned to the Brighton police, and within 10 minutes the telegraph wires were at work to the various ports of embarkation, circulating descriptions of the trio, Boyne's description being furnished by the police at Hammersmith, where he was so well known. That night, Gerald sat with Marigold, and both were filled with wonder at what was happening. Expert criminals of the type of the death dealers never fail to arrange for a safe bolt hole in case sudden escape becomes necessary. The police knew this well and had already taken certain precautions for their arrest. The story of what followed is a brief but dramatic one. The car hired to take them to Brighton conveyed them only as far as Red Hill, where they dismissed it. The Red Widow, having already alighted at Sutton, in Surrey, and returning to Victoria by train, claimed her 2 trunks. Then, by the aid of her false passport and adding age and shabbiness to her appearance, she managed to travel 3rd class from Folkestone to Boulogne and passed by the police and passport officer there, went on to Paris, where already she had a safe asylum awaiting her. At Red Hill, Boyne and his wife halted in an hotel, and after being inside for 10 minutes, the fugitives came out, paid the man, gave him a handsome douceur, and said that they had changed their minds. Thus dismissed, the man returned to London well satisfied. The pair separated half an hour later, Boyne returning as far as Clapham Junction, where he changed and went on to Waterloo. His idea was to get away by Southampton that evening to the Channel Islands, and thence, after a few days, across to Havre. He knew too well that the game was up, and that his only chance was to get abroad. On arrival, he went into the refreshment room at Waterloo, for he had a full hour to wait for the next train to Southampton. Having leisurely drunk a cup of tea, he was just about to emerge when 3 men near the door dashed out and pounced upon him. In an instant he fought like a tiger, but just as quickly the men gripped him, though not a word was spoken, except that a terrible imprecation escaped the assassin's lips. He was a master criminal, and the detectives had not gauged the extent of his wily cleverness. "Very well," he laughed grimly at last. "You needn't hurt my arm. Really, this is all extremely annoying. A crowd had at once assembled at the first sign of a struggle, but the detectives hurried him unceremoniously to a taxi, into which they bundled him. Of that very act, Bernard Boyne was swift to take advantage. For ere they could prevent him, he had managed to slip his hand to his mouth and swallowed something. So quickly, indeed, that the detectives who sat with him could scarcely realize his action. Then, as the taxi sped across Waterloo Bridge on its way to Bow Street, Boyne, turning to his captors with a gay laugh of defiance, said, "Gentlemen, you have done your duty, but you've bruised my arm very badly. Yet I forgive you. Bernard Boyne has had a long life and a merry one. But," he gasped, his face suddenly changed, "but he cheats. He cheats you after all." Next second their prisoner collapsed, and his captors saw to their horror that he was dead. Lilla, in ignorance of what had happened, spent the night with a friend at Reigate, and went next day to Victoria, where she presented the voucher and obtained her luggage, which she took with her to Liverpool, having succeeded in purchasing a second-class passage to Canada in the name of Anna Mansfield, the name upon her forged passport. When, however, 2 days later she had boarded the big liner and was sitting comfortably at tea within an hour of sailing, she was politely invited by the steward to step ashore again as a friend was awaiting her. She at once realized that she had been followed. 2 minutes later, she was under arrest. In the night, she was brought to London, and before the magistrate at Bow Street next morning. The suicide of Bernard Boyne prevented the whole details of the amazing conspiracy from being explained at Lilla's trial, which later on took place at the Old Bailey. She was, however, sent to penal servitude for life as the accomplice of her husband, a just sentence she is still serving. Not until nearly 3 months afterwards was anything heard of the Red Widow, until one night she was arrested in Lyons, and on being brought to Paris, it was found by the Surete General that she was wanted by them for a similar offense in Biarritz, the mysterious death of a red-haired Englishman named Pearson about 3 years previously, and that she had, even then, been in active association with Boyne and his wife. She was brought before the examining magistrate, M. de Caude, and her guilt proved. Just before the date of her trial at the Assize Court of the Seine, she followed the master criminal's example by poisoning herself with one of the same tiny pilules which the insane toxicologist of Harpeth Street had prepared for emergency. This little white pilule she had succeeded in secreting in the hem of her skirt for nearly 4 months, hoping to escape justice. But at last, being convinced of the terrible sentence which awaited her, she ended her notorious career. The demented scientist in Harpeth Street, whom Boyne had held so completely in his power, came to the end of his resources in a month and was certified as insane and sent to an asylum. He made wild allegations against a person named Wisten, but they were always unintelligible to the attendants. The insurance company which had issued the policy on the life of the unfortunate Mrs. Morrison, combined with 3 other companies which had also been defrauded, awarded to Gerald Durrant and Marigold Ramsay the very substantial sum of £1,000 each for their services in breaking up the dangerous and unscrupulous gang. For had the truth not been discovered, they would in all probability be carrying on their murderous work at the present moment. The reward which the young people received went a long way towards buying the pretty little home they occupy at Hampstead, for they are now united as man and wife. Gerald is back again at Mincing Lane, where he has been promoted to a responsible and lucrative position as assistant manager, but Marigold, of course, no longer goes daily to the city. They are never tired of talking of those dark days of their danger and distress, but there is one person to whom they have agreed never to refer, that handsome woman of many crimes both known and unknown, the Red Widow. That concludes The Red Widow, or The Death Dealers of London by William Le Queux. We hope you enjoyed this thrilling journey through the dark underworld of London's spies and assassins. If you like this story, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more mysteries and classic adventures.